That's just the warning that if everyone would take their seats, please. The committee will come to order. Mr. Kucinich.
I have a point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Please state your point of order.
Under Rule 11, Clause B, the use of the committee broadcast system shall be fair and nonpartisan. And my point of order is that since the majority has signs up behind Mr. Cummings, which reflect your point of view and not ours, and since this is being broadcast, and you can see the signs behind Mr. Cummings, that it would be fine, it's fine with me, and I'm sure our side, if you want to put all your signs over there that reflects your point of view, but by having them up behind Mr. Cummings, it's actually taking a partisan, assigning to him a partisan position, since the sign's right behind him. And therefore, my point of order relates to Rule 11, Clause B.
Okay. Noting your point of order, the Chair is prepared to rule. Within the committee rules, it is the signs and other areas of this room are within the discretion of the Chair and are not appealable. However, the gentleman's point relative to broadcast will be evaluated for broadcast appropriateness. The sign is not within the scope of the gentleman's point of order and thus is not appealable. However, we will evaluate in consultation with the ranking member as to broadcast procedures which this doesn't affect, but which we certainly want to make sure that we stay within the point of order that you raised, which is, again, not within the scope of that sign. However, we certainly would like to have a review of broadcast procedures to see if there are any concerns by the Chair as to broadcast. With that, we would begin based on another discretion of the Chair.
Mr. Chairman, did you sustain my point of order then? Or?
No, actually, since it's within the discretion of the Chair, it's not subject to a point of order, and we'd be glad to give you the line that shows that it's a discretion.
Well, I hope you're able to work it out because it seems to me that we have a violation of that rule. Thank you.
Thank you. And I thank all of you here today for your patience. This is a time in which the committee has been preempted by the discussion of funding of the government, and nothing ultimately can be of more importance to the American people than whether or not our troops in harm's way continue to be funded after Friday. With that is the discretion and policy of the Chair that we begin by reading our Oversight Committee mission statement. We exist to secure two fundamental principles. First, Americans have a right to know that the money Washington takes from them is well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is to protect these rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold government accountable to taxpayers, because taxpayers have a right to know what they get from their government. We will work tirelessly in partnership with citizen watchdogs to deliver the facts to the American people and bring genuine reform to the Federal bureaucracy. This is the mission of the Government Oversight and Reform Committee. Today's hearing is on the United States Postal Service, where publicly traded today's hearing is on the United States Post Office and the new contract. Were the Post Office a publicly traded company, it would be among the 30 largest in America, having revenues of $70 billion. Its 30-plus thousand post offices exceeds that of Starbucks and McDonald's combined. Over the years, the Post Office has gone from a growing and thriving industry, able to sustain positive cash flow and effectively positive profits. That is now in our taillights. Today, members of the active workforce enjoy approximately $11,000 worth of legacy burden into their pay, meaning that when the Post Office looks at its cost of doing business, it in fact has legacy costs that very much resemble General Motors before its bankruptcy. The Post Office cannot and will not renege on its promises to those already retired. We cannot and will not renege on the obligation that we have to the American people, both under the Constitution and under hundreds of years of tradition of the Post Office. Every day, 6 days a week, the American people expect that a letter will be delivered directly to their box in front of their house, down the street, or often in a chute in their door. The contract negotiated, not yet ratified, is intended to allow the continuation of a history of collective bargaining, but compromises sufficient to allow the Post Office to emerge from what is at best a break-even, and by some estimations, a $5.5+ billion loss, and to get to a positive position able to meet all of its obligation, both present and legacy cost, in the foreseeable future. This contract falls short of that goal. It is very clear the intention is good. The Postmaster has worked diligently to get some concessions. However, we will hear today that we, in fact, under current law, may not be able to negotiate the contract that needs to be negotiated. Additionally, from this position on the dais, we have deep concerns that some of the provisions of the contract might in fact be the wrong direction toward less flexibility, less ability to trim the workforce, and less ability to make the kind of investments in the future that we need to make. Having said that, this committee stands ready to make legislative changes that may be needed in order to secure for the Post Office the kind of abilities to reinvent itself it needs. Additionally, this committee in the past, on a bipartisan basis, has been willing to delay certain required deposits in order to allow the Post Office time to regroup. At the same time, the hundreds of thousands of letter carriers and postal workers deserve to have a level of certainty that allows them to plan their future, a future in which the Post Office is able to deliver efficiently a product in a reasonable cost and, in fact, meet its obligations. To that extent, we intend to hear from all the participants that we can over a period of time. Today, we have 4, but I assure you, both at the full committee and the subcommittee, we will be hearing many, many, many more. And with that, I recognize the ranking member for his opening statement.
I want to thank the Chairman for yielding in for this hearing. Ladies and gentlemen, the United States Postal Service is the nation's premier mail delivery service, providing universal service to the American people at fair and reasonable rates. Last year, the Postal Service delivered nearly 40% of the world's mail, serving 150 million United States residences, businesses, and post office boxes. Although the Postal Service generated more than $67 billion in revenue last year, it faced serious financial challenges recently. Since 2007, its revenues have declined because of reductions in mail volume, increasing energy prices, and the recent downturn in the United States economy. The Postal Service reported losses of $5.1 billion in 2007, $2.8 billion in 2008, $3.8 billion in 2009, and $8.5 billion in 2010. I'm encouraged that the Postal Service is taking significant and serious steps to address these challenges. Last year, the Postal Service issued a new 10-year strategic business plan that improves productivity, cuts costs in operations, uses more cost-effective retail channels, and consolidates administrative functions. With new leadership in place, we're beginning to witness the emergence of a smaller, smarter, and more nimble organization that is reinventing itself to become more competitive in an evolving marketplace. With this in mind, there are some key points I would like to emphasize. First, the Postal Service pays salaries that are comparable to the private sector. A recent review found that the Postal Service letter carriers received a starting salary that was slightly more than FedEx carriers and slightly less than UPS drivers, both on an initial per-hour basis and after several years of service. I might note that behind me is a chart that says that 80% of the Postal Service money goes into employees, and it's interesting that this very committee, Mr. Chairman, 87% of our money goes for personnel expenses. Second, the Postal Service has been aggressively reducing its workforce. The current workforce is the smallest in 20 years, employing nearly 100,000 fewer workers than in 2008. Since 2000, the Postal Service has reduced its workforce by nearly 27%. Let me say that again, 27%. And it plans to continue reductions through attrition and by extending its current hiring freeze. Third, the Postal Service is actively examining additional proposals to further reduce costs. For example, GAO recently recommended a host of cost-cutting measures, including a legislative proposal to modify the Postal Service's mandated requirement to pre-fund retiree health benefits. Currently, the Postal Service is the only federal entity required to pre-fund retiree health benefits, and these costs are expected to average, ladies and gentlemen, $5.5 billion annually through fiscal year 2016. Mr. Chairman, as we discuss these proposals today, I would like to offer a note of caution. More than 200,000 members of the American Postal Workers Union are in the midst of voting on a tentative labor agreement concluded with the Postal Service on March 14, 2011. This agreement would institute a two-year freeze on wages and cost of living adjustments, and it is projected to save approximately $1.7 billion. It would allow the Postal Service to reduce the starting salary of postal clerks even further from $40,800 to $35,300, and it would implement one of the recommendations made by GAO by allowing greater use of non-career and part-time employees. While it is appropriate for this committee to conduct oversight of the Postal Service, we must be very, very sensitive to criticism that we are using today's hearing to improperly shape the outcome of the impending vote. Both management and the union have negotiated in good faith, and we should allow workers to consider this tentative agreement without undue congressional intervention. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I would like to thank all the postal employees for their dedication and for their hard work. For the 6th consecutive year, the Postal Service, above all other government agencies, continues to be named as the most trusted and reliable government agency by the American people. That's a hell of a compliment. The Postal Service is also one of the largest employers of veterans in our country, with approximately 22%, or about 114,000 employees, veterans, having previously served in the United States Armed Forces. Moreover, approximately 40,000 of these employees are disabled veterans. I feel strongly that our committee should focus not only on stemming recent losses at the Postal Service, but on pursuing options to create a healthy and profitable Postal Service for the future. And a key component of this new organization must be a reasonable and livable wage for these devoted and trustworthy public servants. Once again, I say to every single member of the post office community, we thank you for what you do every day, rain or shine, delivering our mail, dogs biting you, rain, sleet, hail. We thank you over and over again, and may God bless you. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. By previous agreement, we will now recognize the ranking chairman, or ranking subcommittee, the subcommittee chairman and the subcommittee ranking member. Mr. Ross, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank you for this hearing. Today, the committee will hear from the Postmaster General and 2 of the presidentially appointed Board of Governors who will attempt to lay out their vision for a substantive postal workforce and describe how the APW contract fits into that vision. This will be the first time in a decade that multiple USPS governors will appear together at a congressional hearing. We know that the Postal Service is one of the largest organizations and employers out there. It has more than 500,000 employees, and that exceeds all of U.S. companies except for Walmart. It has a phenomenal marketing and delivery infrastructure where it goes to every consumer, or it goes to 150 million consumers every day. Unfortunately, due to the ongoing digital revolution, the business model of the Postal Service is fundamentally broken. It is losing billions of dollars every year and now stands on the brink of insolvency. This is not just a short-term problem, as the Postal Service projects growing deficits for the foreseeable future. It is incumbent upon the USPS to develop and implement a new business model as soon as possible. I commend Mr. Donahoe for what he has done. His commitment to implement a comprehensive strategy that will reduce costs by undertaking major organizational restructuring, reviewing post office closures, and adjusting delivery frequency. I hope we can empower you to do more. At 80 cents on every dollar, workforce costs make up a disproportionate share of Postal Service costs. These costs must be addressed head-on as part of any serious reform effort. Among these costs are a large postal compensation premium that has been estimated at 34%. In fact, in 2001 arbitration decision, neutral arbitrator Stephen Goldberg stated, quote, "In concluding that there exists a Postal Service wage premium, I join a long list of arbitrators in prior USPS interest arbitrations who have reached the same conclusion." Close quote. Regrettably, the tentative contract USPS recently announced with its largest union, which represents over 200,000 employees, maintains and expands no layoff protections, guarantees wage increases, and ensures that USPS employees continue to pay a lower portion of health care premiums than do other Federal employees. USPS claims the contract will save them $3.8 billion over its 4.5-year life, but I am skeptical of that. However, as this chart shows, assuming that all these savings are achieved, it hardly makes a dent in projected USPS deficits. Given this, it is unclear how this deal, which would serve as a template for deals with other USPS unions, will give USPS the ability to immediately reduce workforce costs and maintain solvency. One of the Board of Governors testifying today is James Miller, who is a former head of OMB. In contrast to other USPS executives, Miller has expressed disappointment with the APW contract and only endorsed it as the best possible under a broken arbitration system. In a paper Mr. Miller included with his testimony today, he also outlined options for reforming postal collective bargaining and noted econometric analysis has found USPS employees are paid a significant premium relative to their private sector counterparts. I look forward to hearing from Governor Miller and the rest of the witnesses. I would like to thank the Chairman again for this hearing, and I do yield back.
I thank the Chairman. And with that, we recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses for helping the committee with its work. A little over a month ago, the Subcommittee on the Federal Workforce, Postal Service, and the District of Columbia held a hearing on the financial condition of the Postal Service, and the news at the time, as most of you know, was less than encouraging, although it was a bit better than what we saw last fiscal year. At the conclusion of this year's first quarter, the Postal Service had a net loss of $329 million compared to a net loss of $297 million for the same period in fiscal year 2010. However, if you exclude the cost of pre-funding future retiree health care benefits, as the ranking member has pointed out, a burden that no other agency or private business in America is required to carry, and you add the non-cash adjustment to the Postal Service's workers' compensation liability, the Postal Service would have actually ended the first quarter with a net income of $226 million, a gain of $226 million. Further, over the past couple of years, we have witnessed the Postal Service and its employees work to improve efficiencies and reduce costs by over $10 billion. Since 2008, the size of the Postal Service workforce has decreased by over 100,000 employees, which is probably why many observers point out that the Postal Service actually stands as a model for the rest of the Federal Government in terms of lowering costs and right-sizing its workforce and network. The tentative agreement recently reached between the Postal Service and the American Postal Workers Union is the latest example of postal management and its employees working together to ensure the future viability of an entity that serves as a cornerstone of a trillion-dollar industry and supports over 7.5 million private sector American jobs. However, let's be clear that there are certain aspects of the Postal Service's compensation and benefits costs that are out of the organization's control. Specifically, I'm referring to the hardwired health care benefit payment schedule that forces the Postal Service to pre-fund future liability at an overly aggressive rate, again, a requirement that no other agency or company in America must shoulder. On top of its prepayment obligation, the Postal Service is also subject to Federal employee pension rules and guidelines which have resulted in the potential overpayment of both its civil service retirement system and its Federal employee retirement system. So in answer to the question, are postal workforce costs sustainable, which is the subject of this committee, the answer, I guess, is it depends. It depends if we believe in universal service. It depends if we believe in a reliable manner of delivering the mails. It depends if cost to the consumer will be reasonable. And it depends on whether or not this country still respects its workers and is willing to treat them with basic dignity. For this reason, I, along with Congressman Cummings and other Democratic members of the committee, have introduced H.R. 1351, the United States Postal Service Pension Obligation Recalculation and Restoration Act of 2011. H.R. 1351 directs the Office of Personnel Management to update the actuarial methodology to be used in calculating CSRS retirement benefit liabilities between the United States Postal Service and the Federal Government in accordance with modern actuarial practices and accounting standards. Any resulting surplus from the recalculation would then be transferred over to the Postal Service Retiree Health Benefit Fund. Lastly, H.R. 1351 will require that the Postal Service's already agreed upon FVRS surplus of nearly $7 billion also be refunded immediately by applying the following: $5.5 billion towards the Postal Service's fiscal year 2011 retiree health benefit payment, $1.2 billion towards the Postal Service upcoming workers' compensation payment, and any remaining balance toward paying down the Postal Service debt. Since it is the job of this committee to find ways to help ensure the Postal Service remains a valued and viable entity well into the future, I urge all of my colleagues to consider co-sponsoring this fiscally responsible legislation. That said, I look forward to a constructive and honest discussion on this important topic, and I thank all of the witnesses for coming and providing their input in this morning's hearing. Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. All members will have 7 business days to submit opening statements and extraneous material for the record. Without objection, so ordered. We now recognize our distinguished panel of witnesses. The Honorable Louis J. Giuliano.
Giuliano, very good.
Don't want to mess that one up. Right. Is the Chairman of the United States Postal Service Board of Governors. The Honorable James C. Miller III is a member of the Board of Governors of the United States Postal Service. Mr. Patrick Donahoe is the Postmaster General and Chief Executive Officer of the United States Postal Service and a frequent visitor. And Mr. Cliff Guffey is President of the American Postal Workers Union and critical to today's hearing. Pursuant to the committee rules, all witnesses are required to be sworn. Would you please rise to take the oath? My script says to tell you to raise your right hand, but that usually goes without saying. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, but nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Would the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative? Please be seated. Gentlemen, in order to allow time for hopefully everyone on the dais to ask you a series of questions, we'd ask that your entire statements be placed in the record. In some cases, you may choose to work off of them, but if you choose to use your 5 minutes for other material, you'd be well served, because then you'll have your cake and submit it too. With that, please try to summarize during the yellow light appearing in front of you and conclude as quickly as you can when it goes to red. During the question and answer session, because we have a large gathering today, I will have a fairly quick gavel. What that really means is if someone is still answering questions until a few seconds before the end of the time, I may say that you have to give a very short answer, not anything more than a yes or no, or I'll reply for the record. On the other hand, if you were in the process of making an answer, no matter how long as it is necessary, I will allow you to continue until you've completed your answer. So that incentivizes people up here to quit talking in time for you to have a full and complete answer. Additionally, if somebody would like to also answer a question after the time has expired, it will be the general policy to allow one additional person to comment afterwards. I hope that allows us to average 6 or 7 minutes on a 5-minute per member basis, which is about as tight as we can hold it and be fair to both you and to the members. So with that, Chairman, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. As we've talked about, my name is Lou Giuliano, and I serve as Chairman of the Board of Governors of the Postal Service. This is my first opportunity to testify before you, and I thank you for the privilege. The Board shares the concerns expressed by members of the committee about the financial losses at the Postal Service. We also appreciate the fact that some in Congress are concerned about our labor costs, and in particular, the tentative contract that has been negotiated with the American Postal Workers Union. For these reasons, we feel today's hearing is critically important, and the Board of Governors applauds your willingness to explore these issues in depth. The tentative contract with the APWU is the best that was achievable under the existing law. Failure to reach a negotiated agreement places us in binding arbitration, an outcome that, Mr. Chairman, we believe would not have allowed us to realize most of the benefits that we did gain in this contract negotiation. This is especially true as it pertains to flexibility of the workforce. The tentative agreement provides the Postal Service with 3 important things: immediate cost control, a flexible workforce, and long-term structural change. The Board unanimously supports the tentative agreement, which will produce a cost savings of $3.8 billion during its life. We believe that both labor and management have demonstrated their determination to right this ship in these negotiations. We also appreciate the fact that we urge the committee to consider other actions that are necessary to protect the financial viability of this important American institution. On the top of this list is the Retiree Health Care Benefit Prepayment Program. First, let me be clear. We have been and will continue to pay our fair share of health care costs for our employees and retirees. But the $5.5 billion of accelerated payments for future retirees, many of which who have not ever even been hired, mandated in the 2006 PAEA, are an extraordinary burden that no other organization, neither public nor private, is required to make. They constitute a hidden tax that is neither fair nor responsible. We have been repeatedly told that our prepayments for future retiree health care benefits is a scoring issue. During the last 4 years, from 2007 to 2010, we had total net losses of $20 billion. This would have been a total profit of $1 billion had we not paid and expensed $21 billion of retiree health care benefits. Instead of owing $12 billion today, we would have $9 billion in the bank. Only Congress can correct this problem, and I believe it's in everyone's interest to do so. If action is not taken to address the situation immediately, the Postal Service will default on our payments on or before September 30th of this year. Despite the overpayment of almost $7 billion, we continue to have to pay $3 billion per year into the FERS system. We are told that only a change in the law can fix that. The workers' compensation regulations that we work under are cumbersome, unfair, and costly. We have liabilities that no other company that I'm aware of or organization would have. Workmen's compensation represents a $12 billion liability to the Postal Service, and it cost us over $1 billion in cash last year. We ask you to consider the legislation that has been introduced in the Senate to address this issue. It is a government-wide problem. We also require action to create a more flexible delivery schedule. We would prefer not to have to go to a 5-day delivery schedule. But when considering the alternatives, we consider it the best. It's the only way and a significant way to help offset the decline of first-class mail. Management has demonstrated the ability to drive significant improvements in its processes and reduce the size of the postal workforce while improving service levels and adding new delivery points every year. The tentative labor agreement negotiated with the APWU is a solid step to reducing labor costs. We are hopeful that we will achieve further flexibility in our negotiations with our other 3 unions. We are eager to work with Congress to effectively resolve these and other major issues. It is my hope that as by working together, we can enable this venerable institution to reshape itself to meet the future needs of the American public and leave a legacy about which we can all be proud. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Governor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Jim Miller, and I'm responding to your invitation to testify today. Chairman Giuliano speaks for the board. He is chairman of the board. And to the extent that the views I express differ in any way from those that Governor Giuliano expresses or expressed by Postmaster General Donahoe, please list those as my own personal views, and they shouldn't be attributed to any other governor or to the Postal Service management. While I'm on the subject of the Board of Governors, I wish to emphasize that it works in a very collegial fashion. There are 4 Democrats right now and 4 Republicans appointed by President George W. Bush and President Barack Obama. But we work in a very nonpartisan way, and we work very, very hard. Now, thank you for holding this hearing. As Governor Giuliano outlined and other members of the Congress have outlined, the U.S. Postal Service is in dire financial shape. Without some miracle, as Governor Giuliano pointed out, we will default. We will be insolvent and default on September 30th. We will default on the debts that we owe the United States government at that point. And I respectfully submit that only you can avoid that fate. I have submitted, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Ross, or Chairman Ross mentioned that I have submitted a short statement and an attached paper. Let me just say that the point I make in that paper and in my statement is, as Chairman Ross said, the current model for the Postal Service is broken. It's inapplicable. You have a demand that is shrinking. You have the high-profit mail, first-class mail, shrinking. And there just isn't the opportunity to earn those kinds of profits on the high-class mail to subsidize all of the other things that we have done. To survive, the Postal Service needs systemic reform. Financial relief, in my judgment, is not enough. We need systemic reform. We need freedom to operate as a commercial enterprise. Now, I realize that some misgivings have been expressed about the latest APWU agreement. My response is that we did the best we could under existing law. Our current system, from all the evidence that we have in times that we went to compulsory arbitration, is that the system is biased in favor of labor and against management. The unions know this, and we know this. And so in our decision to accept the best we could get with our negotiations or go to arbitration, we had to keep this in mind. And so we accepted this agreement as the best deal we could get. And I respectfully submit, Congressman, members of the committee, that if you want a better deal, you have to change the law. Mr. Chairman, thank you for inviting me here today. I look forward to responding to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Donahoe.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. It's an honor to be here today to testify about the tentative agreement between the Postal Service and the APWU. I appreciate the invitation to testify about such an important development for the Postal Service. For the past several years, the Postal Service has been responding to an unprecedented 20% decline in mail volume. We have been extremely aggressive in managing costs throughout this period. Since 2008, we have reduced 110,000 employees and $11 billion in costs. We recently announced a reduction of an additional 7,500 managerial positions, a 35% reduction in that group since 2008. Our full-time career complement today is 572,000 employees. We will continue to reduce the number of full-time career employees, thereby reducing our legacy costs. By 2020, the Postal Service workforce will be less than 400,000 people. Through process improvement and personnel reductions, we have taken the necessary steps to bring costs in line with declining revenue, and we will continue to do so. More than 8 months ago, the negotiating team began bargaining to shape the labor contract for 202,000 career employees. The parties negotiated long and hard and dealt responsibly with tough issues. We sought and we were able to achieve greater workforce flexibility, immediate financial benefit, and long-term structural changes. One of the most important aspects of the tentative agreement is that it provides significant workforce flexibility. We will be able to schedule our employees in ways that make sense for a variable workflow business, and will be able to increase the use of non-career employees. I would like to impress upon this committee that neither side was willing to take the easy way out, or simply roll the dice and leave our respective fates to a third-party arbitrator. We need the flexibility to properly schedule our workforce, and we achieved that. Interest arbitration is not going to result in flexibility gains of this magnitude. This tentative agreement also provides for immediate financial benefit by freezing wages for the first 2 years and leads to a wage savings of $1.8 billion over the term of the agreement. We negotiated structural changes that result in a two-tier pay schedule for new employees that is 10.2% below existing schedules. We also will be able to increase the use of non-career employees from the 5.9% today with restrictions to a totally unrestricted roughly 20%. These changes provide a benefit of $1.9 billion. I look forward to negotiating with our other 3 unions to gain similar results. While it is the nature of negotiations that neither side got everything that they want, I will tell you it is the best possible outcome that we could have achieved given the legal framework of which we operate. This is a responsible agreement. America needs a healthy postal service and a healthy mailing industry, and although we have seen declines in the use of mail, the mail and physical delivery are extremely important and always will be. Mr. Chairman, while this morning we are discussing our tentative agreement with the APWU, it is important to recognize that our labor agreements are but one element in a larger strategy to return the Postal Service to profitability. Let me assure you I am doing everything possible to take costs out of this system as quickly as possible, and I will continue to do so. Our business model is inflexible. We need reform in the laws that govern us. We must get beyond the mandates that require us to pre-fund retiree health benefits, to overfund our Federal employee retirement system, and to deliver mail 6 days a week. Congress plays an important role in our future. The Postal Service is reducing costs, and we want to work with Congress to gain the business model flexibility that we need to best serve our customers. Let me close by stating the Postal Service has achieved record service and productivity levels over the past few years while absorbing significant volume loss. The credit belongs to our employees. I will never forget for one moment that we are able to deliver for America, and that is due to the commitment and relentless dedication of our employees. We are in the process of changing many things about the Postal Service to better serve the American public. This contract and your commitment to continued engagement in postal issues will help us meet their changing needs. I would be more than happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the Chair would note that you have added one very good member of your team sitting behind you that we all recognize as a leader on this issue, Mr. Strongman.
Yes, and we are pleased to have him. Thank you.
Ron, next time you get up and testify, we will get you sworn in. Mr. Guffey is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I am Cliff Guffey, President of the American Postal Workers Union. Postal workers are very proud of the fact that we provide an essential service to the American people. We have faced many challenges over the past decade as a result of the severe economic recession and a decline of first-class mail. From 2008 to 2010, the postal workforce was cut by approximately 110,000 jobs. Thousands of workers represented by the APW were reassigned to jobs far from their homes and families. This resulted in severe hardships for these workers and their families. Despite all this disruption and all this hardship, postal workers' productivity has increased, and on-time service to the American public has remained at excellent levels. APW approached the labor negotiations that prompted these hearings with one primary test in mind: what will be right for the employees we represent, the Postal Service, and the American people it serves. It is a testament to the value of collective bargaining that the APW and the Postal Service have reached a tentative agreement that meets this test. It gives the Postal Service an opportunity to return to postal employees work that has been contracted out to save money doing it. Under this agreement, the APW will compete aggressively to return work to bargaining unit employees, work that is being performed at a greater cost by contractors and in some instances by higher paid non-bargaining unit employees. The tentative agreement also protects the livelihoods of the people APW represents, people who have dedicated their working lives to provide postal services to the public. Postal employment has been and continues to be an important source of middle-class employment opportunities. The Postal Service employs more than 129,000 veterans in its career workforce. In 2010, these veterans were 22% of the postal career workforce. 49,000 of these veterans are disabled veterans, and 13,000 of them, including me, are rated as 30% or more disabled. In 2010, women were approximately 40% of our workforce, and minorities were approximately 40% of the workforce. I am proud of the fact that this tentative agreement protects the livelihoods of these and all career postal workers. A review of these negotiations of postal history will show that since the passage of the Postal Reorganization Act of 1970, postal wages have closely tracked inflation. Meanwhile, Postal Service productivity, including labor productivity, has consistently increased. As a result, postal ratepayers have benefited from excellent service at low postage rates. Since 1970, postage rates have not gone up any faster than the prices in the economy generally. If this committee wants to help the trillion-dollar-per-year mailing industry, it should relieve the Postal Service of the burden of pre-funding retiree health benefits and correct the overfunding of CRSR and FERS. But for the unique and unreasonable and unnecessary requirement to pre-fund the retiree health benefits, the Postal Service would have had a substantial financial surplus over the past 4 years instead of a substantial deficit. No one could expect postal employees or postal ratepayers to shoulder the cost of paying billions of dollars into a Federal trust fund unnecessarily. That is a problem that requires a legislative solution. I would like to add that here the Congress is again holding hearings on the symptoms of the problem, holding hearings on Social Security, which is a symptom of the problem, holding hearings on unemployed veterans is a symptom of the problem. The problem in this country is the economy. The economy that sets up trillions and trillions of dollars to be shipped overseas, while in America, on our side of the ledger, we have more unemployment, underemployment, lowering wages, and people losing their homes and mortgages. We have problems, our national deficit, trillions of dollars for people overseas and trillions of dollars of deficit here. You correct the problems in the economy, and the Postal Service will take care of itself. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman and now recognize myself for 5 minutes for a round of questioning. Mr. Giuliano, you said several times things along the line in your opening statement of no company would have to bear this. Isn't it true that a company would have to, under law, fully fund its liabilities in real cash transfers for a defined benefits program? Isn't the pension law one in which you must pay in advance every day for what you eventually will pay out for in retirement and in health care, if that's part of your benefits plan?
The big difference in this case, Congressman, is that no company that I'm aware of would be required to pay for future retiree health care.
Okay, well, maybe we'll go to Governor Miller. Isn't it true that every company that has a defined benefit plan does have to pay for future retirees, not future employees, which you said, which we'll look into, but General Motors, I can recall taking I think it was $5.5 billion hit one time by a change in accounting rules that caused them to have to recognize more into their defined benefits plan. And ultimately, by the time they went into bankruptcy, that was their greatest cost differential between themselves and the Japanese, was having to pay into these defined benefit plans. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. To my knowledge, your characterization is accurate.
So maybe the question here today for this committee, which also oversees FERS and so on, is shouldn't every government entity have to fully recognize, at least on paper, the legacy costs they are creating today with employees who will retire in the future? Is there anyone that disagrees with at least accounting for that? I understand your concern is paying for it, but does anyone disagree with the accounting of knowing what the future costs are going to be? Well, let me ask it. Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think you make an important point. We are a commercial enterprise, so we have a bottom line. Most government agencies are not, so it would be an accounting entry. But to have Congress and everyone else recognize that government agencies, other government agencies, have these liabilities would be a good idea.
I think that's something this committee needs to look at broadly, is the truth in accounting of what our legacy costs would be. Mr. Donahoe?
If I could comment too, Mr. Chairman, I think there's a couple things we have to look at here. Number one, when you look at the entire retirement liabilities that the Postal Service has, we feel that we are overfunded into the Civil Service Retirement Fund. I know Mr. Lynch has got a bill coming up to ask the GAO and the White House to go back and look at those accounts. Somewhere between $50 and $75 billion from our estimates and two separate actuaries.
Mr. Donahoe, the question for you, since the administration, I understand, has already rejected the argument, you're asking them to go back and relook at something they've already rejected.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes. I think it was Einstein that said that if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, that's the definition of insanity. Let me take my limited time and go on with just a couple of more things.
Mr. Chairman, if I...
No, please. There'll be plenty of time for follow-ups. But, Mr. Donahoe, you said, and Mr. Miller said, and I think Mr. Giuliano said, that this was the best you could do under existing law. Isn't it true that in binding arbitration, two provisions could not have happened? The provision for insourcing janitorial services that Mr. Guffey referred to as, outsourced at a greater cost, and I object to it being a greater cost. If it is, then we need to address that. But that could never have been achieved except through this agreement, the insourcing. That was not, in fact, a part of the collective bargaining. It became part because it was put on the table. Also, in the case of a change from a statutory approved category of people that were not eligible to be under collective bargaining to this new category who most assuredly will become eligible under collective bargaining. As I understand it, the provision that you negotiated creates an absolute requirement. If you don't join the union, you lose out on $3,000 of free benefits. So isn't it effectively that this new category of workers that was estimated to be $35,000 at the end of 1 year immediately costs us at least $3,000 more before you do a pay raise, so that by year 3, our estimation is this group will cost you more, not less. Mr. Donahoe, would you want to comment on that? Mr. Miller?
I'd like to comment on a couple of things. First of all, we set out in this agreement to achieve three basic strategies.
No, I appreciate all of that, and you'll get plenty of time on that. But one, isn't it true those two items could not have been done by mandatory arbitration? They couldn't have ordered those two changes.
In mandatory arbitration, it is a roll of the dice. We maintain...
Okay, Mr. Miller, would you disagree with that? In arbitration, could those have been on the table? They weren't part of the collective bargaining agreement. Could they have become part, essentially mandating new union employees in a new category?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not an attorney, but my understanding is that if a provision was part of the package that the union was advancing, the arbitrator could take these items and include it in the final determination.
But historically, arbitration is about the pay and benefit of those covered, not those not covered. So the likelihood, at least from the advice I'm getting, is that there were two things which increased the number of Mr. Guffey's union workers, and that is that you are substantially insourcing 4,000 people who previously were just contract employees to clean and do other janitorial work, and this category that now will most assuredly be added to the union and undoubtedly be in the next bargaining contract asking to be treated fairly and equally with their brothers. Mr. Donahoe, if you could answer briefly.
First off, it's important to note that we maintained all outsourcing provisions in the contract going forward. What we looked at in the case of the custodial employees was the financial benefit to bring the work back into the Postal Service with the newly negotiated substantially lower wage rates. We did that with everything we looked at from an insourcing standpoint. We compared costs like we do with everything. We always keep our eye on the bottom line.
Okay, and my time has expired. I want to be thoughtful of that. Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much. You know, it's very interesting when you look at the fact that since 2008, there have been a reduction of 100,000 employees. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of families. And, you know, as I listen to what has been going on this morning, you know, sometimes, you know, you can begin to cut to the bone. At some point, you begin to cut through the bone. Last year, the Government Accountability Office released a detailed report on options and strategies that could potentially improve the Postal Service's future financial viability. A significant portion of this study focused on reducing the Postal Service's compensation and benefits costs. For example, the GAO study recommended creating a two-tiered system that would pay new hires lower wages while grandfathering current employees under the existing pay system. Mr. Donahoe, how does the tentative labor agreement reached between the Postal Service and the APWU carry out that recommendation?
Thank you, Mr. Cummings. We have two things that we've been able to reach agreement with the APWU in terms of flexibility and structural change. The first is we've been able to negotiate a percentage of each of the crafts represented by the APWU. 20% of the clerk craft, which is the largest portion of the APWU, will now be non-career flexible employees. We have 10% in a motor vehicle and 10% in maintenance. So that's one large structural change, as you've noted with the GAO study. The second thing we've been able to do is negotiate an entry wage rate of 10.2% less that never changes. It's a two-tier wage rate going on from now until a person retires from the Postal Service, again, giving us an opportunity for financial relief and flexibility going forward.
So you mean that new person coming in will make 10% going through?
Forever.
Forever?
Forever.
And what impact will that have on the postal system? I'm just curious.
Well,
with the last piece there.
The last piece, what we were concerned about was long-term structural change. In the short term, in the next 3 or 4 years, we will continue to hire very few career employees. But when you get out to 2016 through 2020 and out beyond that, as you hire career employees, you will be able to save that differential.
GAO also recommended greater use of non-career or part-time employees going forward in order to reduce the Postal Service's compensation-related expenses. The Postal Service's 10-year strategic plan made similar recommendation. What steps has the postal system taken to accomplish this goal? And I remind you that this committee itself, 87% of our money goes to employees. You are at 80%. Are you trying to reduce that further?
Well, what we do, being the labor-intensive organization we are, we constantly look to shrink the pie. So you'll always be higher from a percentage standpoint. The idea is you're trying to shrink the total cost. And we've accomplished that through a number of ways, the productivity improvements that people have noted, headcount reductions, as well as this negotiation. Going forward, from a flexibility perspective, I mentioned the percentages before that we've been able to work out with the APWU. The other big change is the fact that within our regular employment structure, we are working with the APW to provide flexible assignments. Currently, you have a number of people that will work 5 days a week, 8 hours a day on the same schedule. Our needs change daily. We've been able to work out an agreement with the APW that provides flexibility, work hours anywhere between 30 to 48 a week with changing hours daily. That meets our customers' needs.
President Guffey, if ratified, the tentative contract you negotiated will bring the new APWU career hires in at a much lower pay scale. What does this new pay system say about the Postal Service and the APWU's commitment to reducing compensation? Because we keep hearing people banging on public employees, and it seems to me that this is going a long way. People are literally making less money. I know that there's a freeze. Is that right, Mr. Donahoe, for 2 years?
Yes, sir.
Is that right? So, I'm just wondering, you representing your union, I just want to know how, what does that say about your union?
First, I'd like to correct one thing. It was Mr. Ice had said. He said that they'd have to join the union to get this health insurance. Our health insurance plan that we're providing to the non-career people is a nonprofit plan that is low cost, and no one will have to join the APW to get the benefit of that plan. In other words, the parties decided that was I insisted that these new people would have to have insurance, and so we would provide it in the lowest cost, but we cannot require these employees to join the union to get that insurance. This is part of your follow-up answer. As a labor organization, we have no desire to destroy the company that we work for. We entered into these negotiations knowing that the Postal Service was under dire financial strait by the pre-funding requirements, and that we would have to work our way through it. And in doing so, we wanted to ensure the future. Now, and some of the other corrections are that we discussed in flexibility, the old work rules that were 5 within 8. That may not allow the Postal Service to keep windows open, say, to 6, 7 o'clock, and by doing so, turning away customers. So we allowed them to do this without overtime. A lot of other issues.
Thank you. I see my time has expired. It's called shared sacrifice. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. We now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mack, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I, for one, like the placement of your signs and hope that members on the other side, if you don't like the signs, then maybe help us craft solutions to change the signs. Last month, Mr. Donohue, last month when you were here testifying, you acknowledged labor costs as a large contributing factor to the Postal Service budget problems, and that your #1 priority was to address these costs. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So since your last visit, what steps have you taken to reduce the amount, 80 cents on every dollar, that the USPS spends on labor costs?
As we've been talking here today, Congressman, one of the things that we focused on going forward is our overall comprehensive plan, which addressed labor costs, among many other things. We have worked through a very good agreement with the APW to reduce labor costs in a 4.5-year period at a minimum of $3.8 billion. Since the last
let me ask you a question. Sorry, and I'll let you continue on it. But this is the best deal that you could have struck under current law.
Yes, sir.
But now you're saying that it is a good deal. So regardless of the current law, you think this is a good deal?
This is the best deal that we could struck under the current law. We think it allows the Postal Service to continue to reduce labor costs while giving us the opportunity to increase flexibility. That was our goal going into these negotiations.
If the law was changed, could you would you consider a better deal?
I'll tell you, if you would change the law, I would love to see you address retiree health benefits, my FERS overpayments, and our delivery flexibility. That's where the big money is.
In your negotiations with the American Postal Workers Union, is it true that you extended your policy not to lay off workers with 6 years of experience, and also guaranteed that there wouldn't be any layoffs for an additional 7,000 workers?
Yes, we did. And I'll tell you why we did that.
That was my next question.
I'll tell you why we did that. When our goal in this negotiation was workforce flexibility, immediate cost reduction, and structural change. We know that you don't get that through an arbitrated decision. So we originally approached the APWU at the very beginning and talked about layoff clause, and I will leave Mr. Guffey to provide his side of the story, but we got the immediate feedback that that was a non-starter. So our feeling was we wanted to go ahead and get a negotiated contract that achieved our goals. The other thing that you have to keep in mind, when you throw things into arbitration, you lose time. It could have taken us a year and a half. And the money that we were able to negotiate out of these labor costs would have been delayed perhaps a year and a half, and we would have never got the same kind of a deal that we got through negotiation.
So I heard as the panel, as all of you in your testimony, continue to say the best deal you could get under current law. Have you asked the committee for changes to current law so you can strike a better deal with the unions?
There have been recommendations made in the past.
In writing to the committee?
No, sir, we have not.
Well, if you're going to come here before the committee and say, we need changes to the law so we can strike a better deal, then maybe you ought to submit what those are to the committee in writing so we can have a discussion about what those changes are.
We will submit those along with the other recommendations to relieve the Postal Service of the mandates that are really causing this problem.
So if you're going to default September 30th, why has it taken this so long to ask for changes to the law so you can strike a better deal?
We have been asking for changes to the law for the past few years, Congressman, and will continue.
But never in writing to the committee.
We will follow up in writing with you.
No, not to me, to the entire committee.
To the chairman. Thank you.
Yes, that would be helpful. So the last question is, I guess, so I just got a nice little article in my on my iPhone here talking about a post office that is going to be closed on Vanderbilt Beach Road in my district. So wouldn't it be better that negotiations with the unions would take place in such a way that people wouldn't lose their jobs, but we were able to get some of the costs under control?
I'd like to answer that question. Here's what we're looking at from a Postal Service access and convenience standpoint, and that's what we're focusing on. There are many different ways that you can provide access to the American public. What we have to do as part of our financial responsibilities that we've laid out in our comprehensive plan is look at how much money we spend to provide that access. When you read about closing a post office, what we're proposing to do is take a good look at each community where we don't have enough revenue coming in and perhaps
I understand
provide that service in another
but for
way.
the unions themselves, I mean, it sounds like the heads of the union would rather see people lose their jobs than to renegotiate contracts.
Part of the NCE, the lower cost employee that we've talked about, would help us to maintain post office operations. What we're looking at is much smaller places where you don't even have any union employees, where you're looking at trading off, say, a postmaster for a contract at a local store, where we can provide better access at a lower cost. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. With that, we recognize the former chairman of the full committee, Mr. Towns, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me thank you for having this hearing. And also let me just sort of commend the Postal Service for the outstanding job that they've done under these adverse conditions. And let me tell you that they're definitely adverse, and no doubt about it. And to think about the fact that you've already eliminated 100,000 positions since 2008, I mean, that within itself. Let me begin by saying, asking, I guess, you, Mr. Miller, in your written testimony, you mentioned that the Postal Service has taken steps to strengthen its revenue base by offering more services and acquiring more clients. You also mentioned providing services in response to customers and entering into partnerships with other service providers. I am very interested in the concept of offering different services other than mail delivery as a means of creating a strong revenue source. Like every other large private entity, the Postal Service needs to adapt to the changing times in order to remain financially and viable in the future. We know that the Postal Service already takes passport applications. I would like to see this expanded to other things. Could you give us some examples of additional services that can be provided that would result in a reliable income stream for the Postal Service?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for raising that. When I wrote that, I had in mind the mailing services, the new mailing services that we have initiated. You know, for example, the box that you see advertised on television a lot. It doesn't matter how much it weighs, if it fits, it ships. Things of this click and ship, things of this nature. I think what you are talking about are products that are ancillary to our business.
Right.
I think my own personal view, as long as we have the monopoly on mail, I'd be careful about going beyond that. And as an economic proposition, I'd be careful about going too far. For example, there have been people that suggest that we get in the banking industry, banking business. I think that would be disaster. But on the other hand, some things that you were hinting on, like the passports and things of this nature, I think there are other opportunities that we have that perhaps do not fit within the current legislative definition of permissible services that might be considered. And I'd have to discuss that with my colleagues, but I think that there might be an opportunity for us to consider that and get back to you in writing, Mr. Chairman.
Right. And let me just say this, too, in that hearings like this is to sort of get information, get ideas, and to see how we can work together. It's not about whether you send us a letter already or not. It's about what you need to send to be able to move forward from this point on. So I don't want to get mixed up here. I want to make certain that we stay focused on what we really need to focus on. So on that point, Mr. Donahue, what is it that we can do here on this side that you think that needs to be done in order to help you to become viable?
The key issue is to address the congressional mandates around the retiree health benefits, to address the overpayment of FERS, and to allow us the delivery flexibility. Those are the key things for us going forward. I will say this. We have been very responsible stewards of this organization. We take very seriously our requirements for the American public for service and our requirements for the American public to provide efficient service. Just what the Chairman said, one of the visions of your committee. So we take that seriously. What we need is your help on these big issues that are beyond our control. We have excellent employees. We've got excellent working relationships with our 4 unions and our 3 management associations. We know how to get things done. The things that we can't control are the mandates, the $5.5 billion in the retiree health benefits. Get those things out of the way, and you will never see us again. All you hear about is accolades about how good of an organization the U.S. Postal Service is providing service to the American public.
Well, let me say this. I think you're serious about it because you hired one of our best in terms of
we know that.
Ron Stroman. So I think you're committed. On that note, Mr. Chairman, I yield back unless there's somebody that disagrees with the fact that there should be additional service, or you should not think about additional services. If anybody disagree with that, then I would like for you to just respond very quickly.
I think that to the Chairman's point, he mentioned all the facilities that we've got out there. There is plenty of opportunities in our lobbies to provide services for other people to come in. We are exploring those. There's definitely opportunities. We know there is still a ton of value in the mail, and I guarantee you we'll work on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now recognize the Chairman of the Transportation Committee and a longtime member of this committee. Senior? No, you're too young to be senior. Mr. Mica for 5 minutes.
That's just using a lot of just for men, so look that one. I don't know if our witnesses noticed, but the group that's been feeding dinosaurs from the House of Representatives is no longer here. And unfortunately, it looks like the post office is somewhat becoming a dinosaur. It's not your fault, you know. Everybody's got one of these, and you get most of your messages. I didn't send any letters to my nieces and nephews today. I sent them an email. I noticed you, from what I read and heard when I was sitting in the back, you've got 572,000 employees, and it should be down to 400,000 just to deal with the kind of traffic that you have now. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you have I didn't see a specific plan on how you get rid of 172,000. I saw the average cost is $89,845 per employee today. You did mention how you get rid of some of the cost for the 572, but that still doesn't help the math. The other thing, you're $6 billion in the hole this time, right?
Yes, sir.
And I understand. I asked, well, how are you financing that? And they said you got sort of a line of credit with Treasury for $15 billion. That runs out in September. What's going to happen in September when we stop feeding the dinosaur?
We don't pay you.
Pardon?
We don't pay the Federal Government all that it's due.
So just default?
Yes.
We will deliver the mail. The Postal Service.
Speaking of delivering the mail, Saturday and Tuesday, is that all off the?
No, we are still very interested in working.
Which is it going to be?
It would be Saturday. That's the best day.
But we've been talking about these things. We talk about them. Some years ago, I had the opportunity. Actually, I went down to the post office. I think I forget who the Postmaster General was. I mean, we had to just about buy him Depends at the time because he'd never seen a member of Congress in his office. But I was stunned by the vacant desks, and they took me around and showed me how many people they got rid of. Usually, if you look at some of the overhead, now you got a lot of postal people on the ground, and people do have to do a good job, and they do a good job in delivering. But sometimes you can get rid of the administrative overhead. Do you have a specific plan for doing away with that?
Yes, sir. We have been
How many have you got in the administrative positions?
We have been very focused on that. We have administratively about 15,000 people, and that includes everybody from operations to
How many have we got in Washington, D.C.?
About 1,100. We just are going through a process reduction here right now, sir. We're reducing 20%.
So I could come down and see a lot more empty desks?
I will tell you this. You'll see empty buildings. In the past 2 years, we have taken 4 buildings, eliminated the leases, moved them into the building we're in now, and we're downsizing again.
Well, that's the big picture. On the local level, and you know, you hear from members. I've tried not to contact you on some consolidations or take a position because you got to do your thing, and it's tough. Hundreds of people show up at these things, but maybe, I don't know if you could sit down with members or others that are close to the subject. I can give you examples. I've got a post office in St. Augustine, Florida. I've been trying for 8 years to get you out of a congested corridor where you can't move traffic, where it's expensive to operate. Just the traffic backup and trying to get in and out just doesn't make sense. But I don't have time. I used to be a real estate developer. I could put a deal together in no time. But you ought to have some people. My observation is the post office doesn't initiate anything on the local level to bring about cost-effective changes. I could put you in a retail center. I got tons of vacant space, but somebody has to have the brains to put this together. I've tried peripherally, and I don't have time to cut these deals. We did one in DeLand, Florida, years ago, and that was a huge success. It revitalized the whole center and that side of town. I've got Daytona Beach. Here's another example. I've gone from 1,100 bureaucrats in Washington and 15,000 down to smaller projects. Daytona Beach, you've got a post office that's a beautiful site in downtown, and it's had the second floor vacant. I tried to get some folks in there, talk to people about doing something with it, and it sits vacant. So, you know, we produced in our committee a report called "The Federal Government Must Stop Sitting on Its Assets." I don't think we had a chapter in there for you, but maybe we could write one.
I would be more than happy to come over and sit down and walk through all the buildings that we've sold, vacated, land deals we've got. We've got a couple great ones going on. Mr. Lynch up in Boston, we're talking with some opportunities right now. We've got a lot of those things done, and I'm open to any other suggestions you have.
Well, I applaud you. And the big one's fine. We need to have a better handle on getting rid of excess property, excess space, excess employees. And last thing would be buyouts. What's the status of buyouts?
We do have an option on the table for some of the people that we're working through right now with the downsizing, and the buyout provision would be $20,000, and it would be paid over a 2-year period. So that spreads our cash out.
For how many?
We have the offer up to 8,000 people. We don't think anywhere near that will take it.
Okay, you're still about 160,000 short. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman, and I might note that you probably haven't heard in your committee about their sales because they get to keep the money. unique to the Post Office that they sell and internally use those dollars. With that, we recognize the distinguished gentleman from the metropolis of Cleveland, Mr. Kucinich.
Very much, Mr. Chairman. In listening to this discussion, what strikes me is that I haven't heard the people who are in charge with managing the Post Office about the moral obligation that you have to those who delivered the mail for 20, 30 years or more with respect to their full health benefits and their full retirement benefits. And people are retired, and they put all that time in. For the life of me, I don't understand why they should have to go begging to the government to assure that all the things that they worked a lifetime for are going to be there. I keep hearing this theme. I had steelworkers in my office the other day tell me that now they got to deal with the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. They're going to be lucky if they get 40% of their retirement benefits. See what's happening here is, by the way, Mr. Donahue, is it your goal to see the Postal Service privatized eventually? Is that what?
No, it's not my goal. My goal is to provide excellent service.
Okay, let me ask you some questions. Okay, have you met with people concerning broader privatization of Postal Service functions? Have you had any meetings about that?
I have not.
Have you or anybody else, any of the governors, Mr. Giuliano?
Congressman, as part of approximately 2 years ago when we started looking at all the alternatives that we put into our comprehensive plan, we looked at all the alternatives. One of those was privatization. Another part of it was other types of products. The conclusion—
That's all I wanted. I just wanted to see if somebody had some meetings and talked about privatization, because I think what's going on here is that there's actually an attack on this very idea of universal service. Because once you privatize, then you can legitimatize knocking down wages and benefits, cutting services. Look, it's already started. I don't know about any of you, but in my neighborhood, you've seen post boxes taken out of neighborhoods. Then you see branches closed. I've seen private delivery service boxes outside of branches. What's that about? You're operating with 100,000 less employees, so your jobs are cut, wages aren't moving up, and the burden here in these discussions seems to keep focusing on the workers. I like that Mr. Towns raised a question about trying to find ways of bringing some income in to assure the Postal Service. But the tone of these hearings, characterizing this service as something that's so much in the past that it's a dinosaur, really belies the fact that millions of Americans rely on this as a service. You might be able to communicate by email, but not everyone does. We understand there is a huge social divide in America in terms of people who use the Internet to communicate and those who do not. And you know, we want everyone working together, have to do that. I'm glad to see you're negotiating. And from what I see, it sounds like it's in good faith, and you're trying to solve within the context of the system. But, Mr. Guffey, are you concerned that these kind of talks, these kind of hearings, could be trying to set the stage for a privatization, broader privatization of the Postal Service? Could you speak into the mic and turn your mic on?
I believe it's leading to an attack on the labor movement as a whole, just as the workers in Wisconsin, the firemen, the teachers, and the police and the state troopers are being attacked in those states.
But what about the Postal Service?
Same in the Postal Service. I believe that's what's happening. I'd like to say there is great opportunities. You know, the Post Office is where the flag flies in every little community across this country. Opportunities for putting in other government services into the Post Office is there. Doing the TSA work, the verification work that TSA could do, could be done in the local post offices.
Could you give this committee, through the Chair, of course, the ideas that you presented that can expand the revenue of the Postal Service? Could you do that?
Sure.
And I just want to add this in my 15 seconds that are left. You're right about this broad attack on workers, but it's also an attack on the public sphere. If you look at the Michigan bill, it sets the state for broad privatization of everything that's owned by the public. People pay for it once and end up paying for it again through privatization. And inevitably, the cost of the service goes up, quality of service goes down. I thank you. Yield back my time.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has ended, and I will take the opportunity to question now and appreciate the panel for being here. This is an open hearing with a great opportunity. I would quickly add that I appreciate the fact of having a rural mail carrier that services my home and services is not only with the mail, but in many human ways that add I think, some real special additional effects to what a mail carrier can do. And I appreciate the work that's involved there. I also have a daughter who lives in a third world country and works there. And I know for a fact that her mother and I are unable to send her mail with anything of value in it, knowing that it probably won't reach her. We don't worry about that in the United States. So I applaud you for that, and I thank you for the service that you provide. But we also have to understand that we've got to make it work for the taxpayer, too. And I appreciate the efforts, and that's why these hearings are being undertaken. I received a letter just recently from a constituent in my district that operates a family-owned mail transportation business and employs 45 people in doing that business. His business performs services at a fraction of the cost of USPS employees, and this tentative contract, which insources 600 highway contract routes, could negatively impact upon his small business. Mr. Miller, as you rightfully stated in your testimony, using contractors helps lower the USPS costs. Can you quantify how much contracting saves USPS overall, and explain how the tentative agreement with the APWU that insources at least 4,000 jobs will help attain fiscal responsibility?
Mr. Chairman, I would be glad to do that in writing. I haven't those numbers on the top of my head. On the second part of your question, there was some give and take in this agreement. We gave a few things the unions, the APWU wanted. We took things, and they took some things that we asked for. As I think the Postmaster General has described this morning, and if not, we'll send you some additional information, the unions have to compete for this insourced work. They have to demonstrate that they will provide it at least the same cost that we could go outside and get it. I think it's very important that we be aligned.
That's the same cost at this point in time, but not dynamically.
The same cost could be contracted for at whatever point that it might be.
But the concern that, as we look at the budget dynamically in the future, that indeed can be a low cost put in now, taking these jobs away without the incentive in the future because of the contracting situation we have.
Mr. Chairman, you're absolutely right, and we have to be very careful the way we execute that provision. But you put your finger on something, and that is the importance of our being able to continue contracting out, and contracting out in some areas where the service is now provided by postal employees. This is a way of our lowering cost and keeping a restraint on labor, wage, and benefit demands. And I will come back to a point that in response to Congressman Mica's raising about the sale of assets and about relocation, et cetera. We have been very troubled, the Postmaster General, the previous Postmaster General, the Board of Governors, by the propensity of Congress to put riders on appropriations preventing our doing these things. And that's one reason we haven't done as much as we might have. And if there could be a moratorium, it's like a moratorium on earmarks, there could be a moratorium on these riders, I think we could move more swiftly and more effectively and efficiently in the areas that Congressman Mica identified, and the area that you're identifying, that's contracting out.
Well, that's certainly worth looking at and part of the process. But let me just jump here quickly in the few remaining seconds. We've talked about contracts. Well, what would a good contract look like to you, Mr. Miller? And then I would want to jump over to Mr. Donahoe.
A contract would be one in which the service provided would be at least as good as what we are accustomed to having, and the price would be lower than what we're paying now.
Mr. Donahoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have 30,000 contracts in the United States Postal Service. So we contract everything from using FedEx's planes, where they're the largest customer, all the way down to a number of mom-and-pop contracts like you talked about. We take every one of those contracts very seriously. What we looked at in this negotiation with the APW as far as bringing some work back in was our ability to absorb work into the existing framework. The flexibility that we got in truck schedules allows us to schedule people in a much different way than we had in the past. We used to schedule 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. The new schedules give us a lot more flexibility. I can absorb in the 8-hour time frame smaller contracts with HCR, and saves me bottom line money without adding on any people, at the same time absorbing those costs. That's what we've looked at. We have embraced process management in this organization across the board, and we have rooted out numerous costs and identified these opportunities, and that's what we pursue. The other thing that's important, we did not give up any ability to outsource. As a matter of fact, the APWU has asked that they are able to compete on a same basis with any outsourcings going forward, and I welcome Mr. Guffey to come in with those proposals.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Donahoe.
Thank you.
My time has expired. We'll move on to Mr. Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I thank the witnesses for your help. You know, the Postal Service goes into every American business and every American home 6 days a week. And I think if there was any illustration of the value of having a public system, having the current postal system, it occurred on and after September 11th. Most people know I have an extraordinary number of people in my family that work for the Postal Service. My aunts and cousins, my uncles, my mom, my 2 sisters who are still there. My mom's a retiree. But going back to September 11th, which was the day I was elected in the primary, and after that, we had attacks on the Postal Service, anthrax attacks. And down here at the Brentwood facility, we lost 2 brave postal workers from inhalation of anthrax. And I remember talking to some of the local union leaders with the American postal workers and the letter carriers and my mail handlers and supervisors and the postmasters, and they were very concerned about going to work, because in many of these facilities, many of these plants, you had the risk of anthrax. And so the question was posed to the union leadership at the APWU and National Association of Letter Carriers and the mail handlers. They said, should we send our people into work? Should we send them into work when we know that there's, especially with the Brentwood example, there's lethal danger there? And it was a very precarious time, because we in government were afraid that if the mail did not get delivered to every American home and business, that the economy would seize up. This is when President Bush was saying, get out there and try to stimulate the economy. Well, if the American postal worker had not gone to work, it would have seized up our economy. And I think it was a very proud moment that the union leaders at the Postal Service asked their members to go into work. And I know my sisters had, one of my sisters had 2 young kids at the time, and I know that was a vexing situation for the union leadership and the workers themselves. But God bless them that they went to work and they kept the mail being delivered, and we got through that tough spot. But with all this talk of privatization, I wonder how that would have gone if those were private employees for some contractor. Do they make the same commitment to deliver the mails in a tough situation? Do they handle the security and the special responsibility that they have with respect to our nation, as do the postal employees? And I think it's remarkable, as one of my colleagues noted, that for the 6th consecutive year, postal workers are again rated. I think it's the Pew poll. The Pew Foundation does a polling on the popularity or the reliability of Federal employees in all employees in regard to the American people, and they continue to rate the postal workers the highest 6 years in a row. But we're talking today, at least in one part, about going to 5-day delivery, and I'm wondering if that's just one way of if the Postal Service isn't going to deliver on Saturday, then who is? And I think there will be a private entity that will want to take up that space. Mr. Donahoe, you have any thoughts on that about losing market share for the Post Office by considering going to 5-day delivery?
Well, thank you first, Congressman Lynch, about the excellent comments about our employees. They do a great job. We're very proud of them. And even this winter, up your way, that mail got through every day in really trying conditions. The Saturday issue is an issue we've wrestled around with, and it's been a concern. The big concern we have is that there is a changing marketplace, and the first-class volume that we've lost over the last few years has really pressed us in terms of revenue per delivery, and that's why we've looked at making these changes. The one thing we would do in this process would keep our post offices open so you could still come in and buy stamps. If you needed to get mail, we'll have post office boxes open. We'll be able to do that. And, of course, we'd still be delivering things like express mail. As we examine the demand for mail going forward, it does press us on some of those choices. We've looked at things like asking the American public to move their mailbox. We've done some surveys in that area. People say they don't want that. We've talked about changing service standards to save us some money there. We've got some feedback there that wouldn't work, and of course we hear about the post offices. So it's an ongoing process. We continue to look at that, but as we've laid out in our comprehensive plan, we think that just the nature of the changing demand for mail would force us to move to a 5-day delivery schedule.
Thank you. I see my time has expired. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We now recognize the Chairman of the Subcommittee, Mr. Ross of Florida, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And gentlemen, I thank you all for being here. You know, I take very seriously, as you all do, the issue of the pre-funding of the health care and the pension. And assuming that we are able to address that, because I believe it's something that we need to address. Mr. Donohue, it doesn't necessarily, though, resolve the long-term issues of the United States Postal Service, does it?
No, it doesn't.
I mean, we still have to make some systemic changes.
Absolutely.
We still have to address workers' compensation.
We have to address that, absolutely.
Overcapacity.
And we're doing that.
Underperforming facilities.
Yep.
And labor costs.
Yep.
So while we're able to identify that there's a big issue out there, the bigger issue is really the systemic changes we need to make to the Postal Service for the long-term viability.
And that's what we've laid out in our comprehensive plan, and this agreement with the APWU from one union helps us to get in that direction.
Now, you and I have been able to meet several times, and I appreciate not only you and your staff for the cooperation you've given me and my understanding for my subcommittee responsibilities. We discussed a pay-for-performance plan that has been in existence for about 10 years with managers and supervisors, I guess, about 65,000 of them. Could you just briefly describe how that's worked?
We have established a pay-for-performance plan in the Postal Service. To your point, we have 65,000 people. That's postmasters, that's supervisors, that's administrative people, all of the non-bargaining employees in that. What we do yearly is set goals. We've got national goals on service, on finances, and on people, a balanced scorecard, and we also have individual goals at a unit level. We have constructed a process that all 65,000 people have an individual rating, and that's how they're compensated. It's strictly a pay-for-performance system. We have no COLA. We have no step increase. All of our managers in this organization are compensated on pay-for-performance.
And what has been in your experience with those managers? Do they like it?
They like it. It's competitive. They are on that website all the time seeing how they do, and it has produced tremendously good benefits for the Postal Service and, more importantly, for our customers.
Now, translating that mindset to the collective bargaining negotiations that you have, has this type of pay-for-performance ever been introduced or discussed in a collective bargaining situation?
Mr. Guffey and I have had some discussions, and we talked about, what going forward in that area. The changes that we have been able to effect with this negotiation are the most we've ever seen. The fact that we have been able to change flexibility and long-term pay structure indicates that there is a willingness for the APW to really take into effect our customers and our business going forward.
But never was put on the bargaining table a pay-for-performance plan, was there?
Well, we had some discussions, but like some of the other things, it's a give and take, and I certainly—
And Mr. Guffey, I mean, you mentioned in your remarks that, of course, if the economy were to get better, then that would change things. But in fact, it's much more than the economy. I mean, if it were just the economy always being the driving force, we may still be riding around in horse-drawn carriages or having mail delivered by bicycles. But it really has to do with market changes, with technology. And is it not true, then, that in order to adapt, the United States Postal Service and its employees have to adapt to changing trends in the market, not only the Internet, but technology as a whole?
It's true that there are some Americans who will never use the Postal Service again, but they're not required to pay for it because the Postal Service does not receive one dime of taxpayer money. It's everything, the benefits, the wages, the buildings, everything is paid for by postage. And while the market, there's individuals in the market who will use the Postal Service.
But it's more than just the economy. In 2006, we had a good economy, and yet first-class mail started declining significantly.
But we could rebound from the decline in first-class mail if we didn't have the $5 billion weight put upon the Postal Service.
But it's more than that. I mean, let's be honest. It's a lot more than that. And let me ask you this now. How do you feel about this agreement?
We're both going to be honest?
Sir?
I'm going to try.
I'll ask the questions.
Okay.
Thank you. Now, how do you feel about this agreement?
I feel like the agreement was a give and take. I think the agreement, we gave some flexibility in exchange for the security of our people for various things. A lot of talk has been about the no layoff clause.
And you told your employees it's a pretty good deal, didn't you?
I have told my people exactly what it is.
And you think it's an excellent deal, so much so that you're going to pay your members to vote, are you not?
I'm not paying anybody to vote.
You're not paying your members? Have you looked at your website where it says, to encourage participation in the contract ratification process, APW President Cliff Guffey is encouraging locals to get out the vote. The National Union will reward the locals that are most successful in mobilizing members to vote, with the top 3 locals in each of several categories receiving monetary compensation to be used on behalf of the local members. So you're buying their vote, are you not?
They can vote no. And if every one of them votes no, they vote no.
In addition to buying their vote, are you not also using it as a membership drive?
Sir, it's an affront to say I'm buying people's votes.
I
realize that's common practice on your side of the table, but it's not with mine.
Does your website not offer compensation to vote?
It offers people to encourage people to vote. It encourages the locals to vote, not one way or the other.
The Chair would suggest that neither side get into rationale behind somebody's intention, and I would expect that on both sides of this debate. And I appreciate that you're both very interested in getting it right, but I would make that caution. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman, Mr. Davis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and let me thank all of the witnesses for being here with us. These are obviously difficult and complex issues and serious problems. I've always been told that there are no simple solutions to complex problems. Governor Giuliani, do I understand and did I understand you to suggest that if we did not have to pre-fund the retiree benefits for the Postal Service, if they did not have to pre-fund those benefits, and although we thought we were putting in some good provisions in the Postal Accountability and Enhancement Act, that instead of a deficit, we'd be talking about profits in terms of the Postal Service?
My statement was over the last 4 years, that would be true, Congressman.
What would be the downsides to not having that requirement? If that requirement was not present,
I don't believe there is any downside. We are funding on an annual basis to the excess of $2 billion health care benefits for our employees. We commit to, we have been paying them, we continue to pay for them. Private corporations do not have to pre-fund retiree health care benefits. They have to account for them on their balance sheet. It's not a cash output. And in fact, because that's such a burden, in 1992, I may not have the year right, but in the early 90s, there's an accounting rule change that said companies had the option, a one-time option, to cap forever retiree health care benefits. Because if they couldn't do that, if they didn't do that, they would have an unbounded liability on their balance sheets, and there'd be no way to be able to tell whether they were a going concern. Most corporations in this country took that option and capped them in 1992. And whether you retired in 1980, 2000, or 2040, the company has no more responsibility for those health care benefits than what the cap was in 1992.
And while this would obviously not solve the problem in terms of our long-range conditions, but it would be movement, and we would not be standing still. We would be moving.
It would be significant progress. We've made progress with the $3.8 billion in this union negotiation, $5.4 billion payment per year would make a significant progress. We also need to move forward with 6 to 5. We also need to stop overpaying for FERS. These are the drivers. There's lots of changes that need to be made. They're all comprehended in our plan. We've considered all these things. We've offered what we believe to be the most rational choices. We don't want to have to do 6 to 5, but considering all the alternatives, when we polled the American people, when we took our surveys, when we had outside experts look at that, they said, out of all the alternatives, raising prices, changing delivery standards, and a whole bunch of others, this was the least painful. This was the best we could do.
Mr. Donahoe and Mr. Guffey, let me commend both of you on the tentative contract that has been negotiated. I think that it is one of the most positive labor management movements that I've seen in a long time. And I know that there are efforts on the parts of some people in our country to diminish the role of unions, who have fear, but it seems to me that you struck an accord that suggested that both sides understood that it was not a win-lose situation, but it's a win-win situation for the American public. And I think that's where we have to go. So how would both of you comment briefly relative to being able to reach that agreement?
You want to go first?
Just real quickly, I think American labor and industry has to come together and work together to bring back industry and commerce to this country. And I hope this is a step to show other people that it can happen.
I would agree with Mr. Guffey. We have great employees in this organization, and they want to do a great job for the American public. And I think that as we sat down and talked through things that we needed from a Postal Service perspective for flexibility and cost benefits going forward, we were able to achieve that. And Mr. Guffey was able to achieve what he needed for his employees, and it was a win-win. And it is a very good thing for the American public and our customers.
I commend you both and yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. We now recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Dr. DeJarle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to just take a few minutes and maybe put some things in perspective. We're facing a tough battle this week on the budget, and certainly the country right now is hurting in many ways, and people are scrambling to cover themselves and make sure that financially they can be as stable as possible. We go back to districts with high unemployments, 9% across the country. Several counties in my district are upward to 20%. And times are certainly tough, and I sympathize with everyone. According to committee calculations, the average employee cost for USPS is $89,845 per year, or close to $45 per hour in benefits. Is the total compensation averaging out more than $80,000 per postal employee per year, including wages and all benefits, including retire health benefits, Mr. Donahoe?
Yes, I'd have to double-check those numbers, and I'd get back with you on that. But the way we calculate our costs, it is wages and full benefits, including retirement.
Okay. So if that's true, then the average work hour for a USPS employee that's publicly reported is about $40 per hour?
We consider a fully loaded hour right around there, yes.
Okay. Do you think that's generally a fair amount in terms of trying to keep the Postal Service running when you're doing these negotiations, talking to employees? Nobody wants to give up anything. It's hard to take things away from people once they have them. But is that as low as people are willing to go to keep their jobs?
I think that, again, to the point we've been making, when we went into this negotiation, our goal, 3 goals. We were looking for immediate financial relief, we were looking for flexibility, and we were looking for long-term structural change, and we achieved those. We've got a substantial change in the way that we will be compensating non-career employees, and that pulls that loaded factor down significant by 53%. The other thing, of course, is the 10% differential going forward. That also will pull those down. We realize the labor costs are high, and as we've worked with the APWU, they understand where we were coming from. The other thing that's important is we also have real opportunity with the flexibility that we've negotiated in there, so that if you have a full-time employee, they can now work between 30 and 48 hours a week, which is very different than we've had in the past. So, Doctor, we are looking at every possible way to provide great service in an efficient and effective way.
Okay. Can you speak just briefly to the graph that's behind us here, the private sector versus Postal Service?
I can see that. It would be interesting to see the numbers, but it almost looks like the blue line starts going up when we began to pre-fund employee health benefits. That's the first thing that I see. We have been it's critical to understand that the Postal Service has focused not only on total labor costs in terms of wages, but we have focused on headcount. We've reduced headcount in this organization by 30% since the year 2000. That's legacy costs.
Thank you. Mr. Guffey, when I go back home and talk to my folks, it has been mentioned that the Postal Service doesn't cost the taxpayer a dime. What's going to happen if you default on September 30th? Who does that burden shift to?
I believe Mr. Miller said it would be a miracle for these things to happen. And, I think Congress can work together and resolve the problems of our country and the Post Office. And I think that's what America wants you to do right now. I think they want their post offices in rural Tennessee. I think they want to have their mail delivered. I think they want this sort of thing.
As I said, you had mentioned earlier that you employ 100,000+ veterans, which I think is great. That's fantastic. What do we say to the active military personnel whose wages are far less than what we're talking about here in the $40 per hour?
Well, I'm not sure if you take the weighted average of about the military benefits that are involved with their retirement and their health benefits, which are all provided by the government too. If you put it all together, I'm not sure their package would not be the same. I'm just saying that yes, we would like to have good jobs for these people to have when they do come home. Talking about the custodial jobs, they were maybe priced a little higher than they should be, but they were jobs that were reserved for the veterans, so the veterans could come home to these good jobs.
Well, when you're talking about concerns about your employees losing their pensions and their benefits, what do we say to the private sector who faces losing Social Security and Medicare benefits?
Well, I think they only face the losing of Social Security and Medicare because of the economy, and that our jobs, like say hundreds of thousands of jobs are now overseas. Trillions and trillions of dollars of American money is overseas right now, as opposed to being working in this economy and lifting up this next generation to where they pay, and you broaden your tax base so you can afford Social Security and Medicare for these people. That's the real problem in this country right now, not the fact that public workers are making too much.
You don't think the government spends too much? You don't think there's ways?
There's a lot of things I think that the government spends money that they shouldn't be spending on. Like I said, this hearing is costing more right now in tax dollars than what the Postal Service is getting out of tax dollars this year.
And that's a big part of the problem, and that's what we're here to solve.
I thank the gentleman. The Chair would note that the graph that was on the screen does not include the pre-funding. That's a pay-as-you-go cost. And I appreciate the gentleman who, by the way, I think we're both on salary. So I'm pretty sure that whether we show up here for a hearing or not, the cost is substantially the same. The Chair now recognizes the distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Tierney, for 5 minutes.
I thank the Chair for that, and I thank all the members of our panel. First, let me say that I think that the way that you collaboratively work towards a tentative agreement is to be commended. I think that's what the collective bargaining process is all about. And it seems to me, from listening to your testimony and reading it here today, that everybody made concessions. Which is, in essence, what the American people expect out of public service employees and employers when they go to these negotiations. They want everybody to be reasonable. And I also seem to think that they would look to be downsides for both of you if you decided to push the button and go on to arbitration. And I think that was a trigger to getting things done here. So I think that that's at least a positive that we can take out of this, and knowing that there were constraints seen by management and what they perceived to be some legal constraints. And I think the union's obviously under constraints of not wanting to risk going to arbitration and coming down with far less than what you got. But I want to talk about, I'll leave to the testimony that was already given and the questions asked about the pension and retirement contributions and how much that would go towards solving the issue that you have here. When we had a hearing back on April 15th of 2010, John Potter, who was then the Postmaster General, was one of our witnesses on that. And I asked him a little bit about the privatization and what would be the cost to the American citizens if the thing was privatized. And he talked, and I'm going to just synopsis a little bit here. He talked about the fact that it's fair to expect that you wouldn't get mail necessarily delivered to your doorstep. Prices, in all likelihood, would significantly go up, that not all areas would, in fact, be served. These would all be, so universal service would be threatened. So these would all be decisions that management could then make on that. I then wondered whether or not there wasn't some price tag, that what we got in terms of universal service and a large retail distribution situation and 6-day mail and all of those things that we get for having this type of service as opposed to a privatized service, if somebody hadn't put a value to that. And Mr. Potter said, we put a price tag on that of about $4 billion. And then he said, now in today's dollars, it's like $4.5 billion on that basis. Do you gentlemen agree with that?
That's when the Postal Service was first formed back in the early 70s, there was a universal service option that we could have asked for continued appropriation to actually cover our universal service. And if you look forward with the value of money going up through inflation, it would turn out to be about that amount.
Okay. Well, I wondered why we hadn't gone forward, but Mr. Potter then said that they ended up in very poor condition in the late 60s because of the difficulty in getting the appropriations, and they were reluctant to ask for it.
That's our issue has always been one of a self-sustaining entity. If the government does not pass the budget this week, the mail will still get delivered. We have been self-sustaining. What we have been asking for is for Congress to act on these mandates around the pre-funding requirements, the 6 to 5 day and the FERS. As I've said before, we get those resolved, we know that we will be a viable, ongoing business. We still provide excellent service for the American public. That's the help we need from Congress.
You look at it another way, though. It's like people, I think people by and large want the services they're getting, the universal service, the 6-day mail, and all those things, that basis. So you have a customer out there that owes you about $4.5 billion a year that you're not collecting. I don't know what kind of a business decision, a management decision that is. Mr. Guffey, do you have a comment on that?
Well, it would be nice and refreshing to see that the money was coming from the government to the Postal Service instead of just from the Postal Service to the government.
Mr. Donohue, you're smiling at that, but I mean, you do have a customer out there that we put a value of $4.5 billion in the services that you render to them without ever collecting a dollar for it.
Well, the reason I'm smiling is because we have some other bills that have been owed over the years, and sometimes they don't get paid. So we would like the Congress to feel that the Postal Service can stand on its own and do a great job for the American public without any kind of appropriation. Well, that's what we're asking for.
Okay. All right. So I guess
and no
all
taxpayer
semantics.
money.
If you look at it as an appropriation, or you can look at it as paying value for what you're getting in return. So you've decided, I guess, that it's not worth the political hassle to ask the American people to pay $4.5 billion a year for the service they're getting. It's much easier to try to run starting with $4.5 billion in the hole and try to build around that.
Here's the thing. We have paid into the retiree health benefits $43 billion. What we would love Congress to do is to take a look and see that $43 billion, along with what the Chairman mentioned, our ongoing payments, we think when you go ahead with a 400,000-person Postal Service going forward, we're already covered with that. So we don't want any money. We want no taxpayer money. We just want Congress to remove that burden that we're being forced to pay. First, I owe $6.9 billion, or you owe $6.9 billion back to me in first overpayments. I got a bill last week from the OPM increasing my premiums. I mean, I'm already overpaying. Just give us treat us fairly. We will do a good job for you.
Well, I already co-sponsored that bill, so let's see if we can do the rest of them. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Brawley.
I assume you're referring to Mr. Braley, Mr. Chairman?
I'm sorry. I apologize.
No,
I know better.
No need to apologize. I'm one of those people who thinks in order to know where you're going, you have to know where you've come from. And I think it's interesting to note that on July 26 of 1775, the Second Continental Congress appointed Benjamin Franklin as the Postmaster General at an annual salary of a whopping $1,000. And Mr. Donohue, I'm sure a lot of colonists thought that he was grossly overpaid for that work, but we all know how important it was in the evolution of this country. In 1808, the Select Committee on Post Office and Post Roads was established by the House of Representatives, and it was the beginning of a surface transportation program that has benefited this country ever since. One of my wife's grandfathers was a first-generation American whose father came from Germany, and he left to go back to fight the Kaiser and World War I, the world to end all wars, came back and became a letter carrier in Dubuque, Iowa, and became president of his letter carriers local. And when they started renovating the White House under the Truman administration, the people he worked with thought so much of him, they spent the whopping sum of $2 to get some of the timber from the White House to make a gavel for him that I am fortunate to have in my possession. When my father left the small rural community in Iowa that he lived in to go to Iwo Jima at the age of 18, he got letters from his mother that I am thrilled to have in my possession that only got to him halfway around the world because of the hard work and efforts of men and women in the Postal Service and postal delivery system. That's why I love letter carriers and postal workers. My dad came back and became a substitute rural letter carrier. And I know from growing up in a small town that that postal delivery service was often a lifeline that got you much-needed services that you needed to do your work and to function in society. But I'm very impressed with the fact, as the ranking member of the Veterans Affairs Economic Development Committee, that unlike many Federal agencies, the Postal Service has done an extraordinary job of employing veterans. And you brought this up in your testimony, Mr. Guffey. And here at a time when returning Iraq and Afghanistan veterans have an alarming unemployment rate of 22%, I'm trying to figure out why my friends on the other side of the aisle want to add to our unemployment problem by firing veterans, by firing women, and firing minorities who make up a large percentage of the Postal Service workforce. That's a question we all need to be concerned about. Some of my colleagues have argued that a union would never lay off a hardworking veteran postal worker. We know that's not true. We know that it happens because that's the way the Postal Service has had to make tough decisions. We also know that if we're going to fire middle-class American veterans that work for the Post Office, it's not going to fix our budget crisis. And that's why we have to fix this problem with pre-funding, because we know that it is the low-hanging fruit. It is the most clear, obvious opportunity we have to make an impact, and that's what we should be focused on. According to two independent offices in an OIG report, the Civil Service Retirement Service is overfunded by $50 to $75 billion, and the Post Office's FERS program is overfunded by $6.9 billion. We should let the Post Office transfer that budget surplus to fund their future health care obligations and make sure at the same time that we're doing everything to promote efficiency. And Mr. Dono, I remember when my daughter graduated from high school 5 years ago, and I was thrilled to find out that I could get customized stamps of her and her friends to give them as graduation gifts that they were thrilled to receive. So we know there's been a lot of innovation going on at the Postal Service to try to address these market pressures, to modernize, and to come up with new revenue streams. Can you give us some examples of what other things the Postal Service is looking at, like that stamp program?
Sure, I'd like to. One of the things that we've been focusing on from a revenue perspective is simplicity and making sure that we can really grow the business-to-consumer channel, especially for small business. So we've just introduced a new product out there called Every Door Direct, and the idea is that in a very simple way, if you're a small business, you can reach within a couple zip codes everybody that lives there. We're also conducting Grow Your Business Days right now at thousands of post offices across the country all summer long, teaching people how to use eBay, Amazon to grow their small business. Congressman Mica showed me before he got that email on his BlackBerry. One of the products we're working on right now is the opportunity to show you what's coming in your mailbox today. We have that technology. We have that as a product going forward. So we know that we can do things for small business. We can also do things for people who like to have a little bit of digital in their products too.
Thank you. My time has expired. I'll yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Mica.
Well, first of all, Mr. Guffey, I'd have to take great exception with your comments on this is some sort of assault on labor, whether it's in Wisconsin or in or this hearing. Mr. Guffey, do you know what the financial differences between the States and the Federal Government is?
The big difference, and there is not a whole lot of difference, the American taxpayers pay the cost for both.
Yeah,
and you have to have taxpayers employed to pay the taxes so the payroll can be done.
That's true, and we've spent the last several years paying people not to work, rewarding failure and penalizing success, and we've been great keeping the unemployment up about 10%. Not to mention other areas that are 20 and 30%. The big difference is that the Federal Government, we just keep printing the money. If you go out the door here and go down the end and go out on Independence, you can almost hear those presses going day and night, printing funny money. We've indebted this country $5.3 trillion in, what, 24, 30 months. We're borrowing. So the big difference is that the States have to have a balanced budget. We're printing the money, okay? So the states, you call this an assault on labor, but they're making tough decisions dealing with their biggest cost factor, which is their employee base. And it's not pleasant for anybody. This is not a hearing that's intended to do an assault on labor. Do you know how much we're borrowing for every dollar we're spending, Mr. Guffey?
Way too much. The economy
it's
should be here.
about 42 to 43 cents per dollar we're borrowing, most of it from foreign sources. This is not an assault on labor. You know, I'm in the transportation area. We used to have we kept firemen on trains, even though we didn't use coal or anything. We had to fire for many years. We had conductors and cabooses, even though we had adopted electronic means of communicating with the train workmen. You're aware that it wasn't an assault on labor when we had to eliminate some of those positions. Would you say that was an assault on labor?
Well, when you use 70-year-old examples, I don't think that I can't relate to some of those 70-year-old
well, again,
examples.
okay, let's use a modern example. They're telling me they can run the post office with 400,000 people, and I have 572,000. I've got to make some changes. Is it just make work? I mean, more and more is going over this. They're even going to this. When they go to this, they'll need fewer than the 400,000.
You can order your medicines over that, but you cannot get them delivered to your home.
Well,
the mail volume is going to change. True. The type of mail is going to change.
That's true, and that's why I usually use FedEx or UPS. But this is no affront. I love postal people. George Coleman was my postman for 17 years. He went on to be the mayor of DeBary. My postman who came to our home in upstate New York wrote me a birthday card till the year he died. I can't think of people I like better than some of the postal workers I know.
We try.
But this is not an assault on them. This is a change in the whole dynamics of communication in our society. And we've stopped feeding. We can't feed dinosaurs. We can't afford to do that. So again, Ben Franklin, was a postmaster in 1775, appointed by. In 1775, it was interesting. Ben actually arranged to have mail delivered from Philadelphia to New York in same-day service. Did you know that?
Yes, but he did it as the King's representing postmaster, not as the United States postmaster.
Yes, I know, but he could still do it, and even though he had the position, I think his son had the position, they could deliver the mail with same-day service, which we still can't do today in the United States. But what you have to do is adapt, and the post office is becoming a dinosaur and will soon be extinct if it doesn't adapt.
And we're working very hard to adapt with the Postal Service.
The money tree in the backyard died, and we've got to find a better way to deal with $6 billion, and your $15 billion credit limit or whatever it is about to run out, and there's no more coming from here. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman.
Yield back.
We now go to the gentleman, Mr. Yarmuth, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for your testimony. And I'm glad that Mr. Mica brought up UPS and FedEx. I have a very special interest in this hearing because I happen to represent the district, which is the home of the global hub of UPS, and UPS is our largest single employer. And I'm also an honorary member of the Letter Carriers Union and very proud of that. So I have multiple interests. And Mr. Mica said he likes to rely on UPS and FedEx, and I'm glad he relies on UPS. But I went back and checked, and the least you can spend to mail anything or deliver anything with UPS is $5.17, and the lowest price you can deliver that FedEx will deliver anything for is $7.22. Mr. Donahoe, what do you think would be the impact on American business, charities, local governments, utility companies, and so forth, if for every piece of mail they had to send out, it would cost $5.17?
We wouldn't be talking about 1 day fewer delivery. We'd be probably talking 1 day a week. It would be dramatic. Now, we're very proud of the fact that we have been able to hold our postage rates down at 44 cents. And we are also very proud of the fact that we provide excellent package services for businesses, too. We work well with FedEx and UPS. We deliver a lot of their packages.
Okay. This relates to the question that Mr. Tierney asked a while back, and he talked about the $4 billion plus subsidy, essentially, that goes to users of the Postal Service. How would you break down the users of the Postal Service? What percentage of them are commercial enterprises? Which percentage of them would be private individuals sending individual personal correspondence?
It's probably close to 95% of the mail that comes into the system is mailed by a commercial entity. The customer business to the mail that goes between residences today is a lot smaller. You know what? Let me take that back. It's probably 90%, because there's about 10% of customers still use the Postal Service to pay their bills. So me paying a bill or me sending you a card, that represents about 10% of the volume.
So essentially what we're talking about here, whether it's $6 billion or $3 billion or whatever it amounts to a year, forgetting the argument about FERS and the prepayment of retirement benefits, we're talking about an enormous subsidy to American business.
I would not say it in those terms, because I think that the American customers enjoy getting what's in their mailbox. It's a great way for people to advertise. It's a great way for people to correspond, even if it's just to say, hey, check my website out. We feel that the Postal Service is very important for the American economy, the bill payment side, bill presentment. So it's an excellent platform for all users in this country.
I don't disagree at all about those statements, but the fact remains that if all of those businesses who were sending advertising, and I was in the advertising business as a publisher at one point, also took advantage of the break given to publications. But they are sending those advertisements, those solicitations, and they're billing mailings as well, at a rate that is far lower than they could get anywhere in the private sector in a free market situation.
Yes, but again, what we've been asking for in terms of the mandates that Congress has got with us on the retiree health benefits, we think that there's a resolution around those without having any effect on our customers.
I understand. You could continue to offer that very low rate, and I'm very proud of that. I don't want my time to expire. Okay. I mean, when we talk about, the great Republican Lincoln said the legitimate role of government is to do for the people what they can't do for themselves, and essentially I extend that to mean the private sector can't do. And the private sector can't deliver a piece of mail for 44 cents across the country, around the globe.
Probably not.
Probably not. One question, quickly, Mr. Guffey, on the issue of retirement benefits, and this has disturbed me a great deal in light of what's happened in Wisconsin and Ohio and in Indiana. The notion that somehow these are overly generous benefits when we are asking police officers, firefighters, mail carriers, and the like to embark upon a career which requires a great deal of physical exertion, and to have basically a shortened career as opposed to something they might otherwise do. And part of the trade-off, part of the way you get people to embark upon those jobs is to guarantee that there is a healthy retirement for them. Otherwise, you would have police officers, if there weren't a healthy retirement, police officers at 75 years old chasing criminals, and 75-year-olds delivering the mail, and 80-year-olds climbing into buildings. I mean, isn't that part of the consideration here in order to get people to do some of these public service jobs, or quasi-public service jobs in your case?
I think that is a great consideration, but there's also a pride and knowledge of serving America. I'm from that era of John F. Kennedy, to see what you can do for your country. I went to Vietnam. I tried to serve the country in the Postal Service. And my retirement, I take home like $1,600 a month, and out of that, and I pay my health insurance $300, or about $250, something like that. out of my own health insurance, my part of the payment. So it's not a huge retirement by any means, but it's a satisfactory life of serving your country and your fellow Americans.
Thank you for that answer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. We now recognize the younger of two near-identical twins here and present today. I tell you apart mostly by your ties, both of which are stunning, but your father, I think, edged you out a little on the ties. Mr. Clay.
Thank you so much. I'll have to catch up with him on my haberdashery. Let me applaud Mr. Guffey for the comprehensive and thoughtful testimony you submitted to this committee for today's hearing. I think it shows a serious commitment that the APWU has to work in partnership with the U.S. Postal Service to address the challenges that it currently faces. And I stand firmly in support with working with our families in the postal unions, and I am committed to supporting the Postal Service's reorganization to meet the challenges of today and tomorrow. However, I am very concerned with some of the elements of this hearing. This Congress in 1970, through the Postal Reform Act, took action, in essence, to take politics out of the Postal Service and also gave workers collective bargaining rights. I'm afraid that some here today are seeking to return politics back to the Postal Service and perhaps strip those rights. This committee certainly has a welcomed responsibility to perform oversight duties for the Postal Service, and I don't think anyone would question that. I think many here, like you, want to see the Postal Service succeed. The service that USPS so admirably and consistently provides personifies the best of America. What's disturbing is that some want to use this hearing to attack something else that best personifies America, workers' rights, and the freedom that comes with collective bargaining. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that we're here today to help the Postal Service and its workers find the right path to sustainability and success. I don't think that involves getting in the middle of the collective bargaining process, and I don't see how that helps. Mr. Guffey, your testimony demonstrates quite clearly that the Postal Service labor force has made some remarkable gains in productivity in the last few years. In fact, the workforce has been reduced by close to 120,000 employees since 2008 to 572,000 employees. This represents a 27% reduction since 2000. Total costs have also been reduced by $11 billion since 2009, including a reduction of $4 billion in labor costs. Mr. Donahue, you also mentioned in your written statement that the Post Office has achieved record service and productivity levels in recent years. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And yet, on the wage side of the equation, Mr. Guffey, you testified that since 1970, there has been only a fairly modest increase in straight-time wages in real terms. Do you agree with that?
That's correct.
And Mr. Donahue, do you agree with that analysis?
Yes, our employees have done a great job from a productivity standpoint, and they have enjoyed raises that have tracked fairly close to the rate of inflation.
And wouldn't you say that the Postal Service has gotten a pretty good deal out of their employees over the years?
I think the American public has gotten a very good deal from the Postal Service and the employees. They're very dedicated. They've done a great job from a standpoint of productivity and service.
Thank you. I thank you both for your response. And, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and I certainly think that you do have to keep pace on the haberdashery side. You know, you have a haberdashery history with President Truman, and you know, and that alone as a Missourian is critical.
Yeah, we do have something in common. We're from the same state.
I thank you. We now recognize the gentleman from Vermont for 5 minutes, Mr. Welch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I thank the witnesses for their excellent testimony. My view, this is a practical problem to be solved. I don't see that we should be coming at this trying to take away wages and benefits, and I don't see that it should be attacked by trying to take away delivery services that Americans have really come to rely on. I'm from a rural state in Vermont, and I don't know how the letters, we had a lot of snow this year. I mean, we had a lot of snow this year. We had 10 feet of snow. In fact, it's snowing now. And somehow, some way, on my 8-mile dirt road, you managed to deliver the mail. So I don't know who's responsible for that, but it wasn't you guys. I can tell that. It was those people in these little post offices back in Heartland, Vermont, Norwich, Vermont. It's quite astonishing. So there's been I don't know, festive atmosphere here, talking about what's good and bad, but the bottom line is the mail's getting delivered. The other thing that's quite amazing is you're doing it on these snow days for 44 cents a first-class piece of mail. That's a pretty good deal. And it's business, and it's those personal letters that we don't get as many of, but we all love to receive. And the other thing that is amazing, and I think it's just got to be acknowledged, it gets sort of swept aside when we get in these discussions, is that the things that the commercial deliverers don't want to provide to deliver, you guys do. And a lot of times it's frustrating when we go to our mailbox and there's more, quote, junk in there than we want, but it is a part of commercial life in this country. So I think those have to be acknowledged when we're trying to wrestle with this problem. The other thing, you pointed out that you've had about a 30% head count, 100,000 fewer employees since 2008. You know, Governor Miller, that's an amazing thing. You know, we sit up here on these dais and act as though it's time to change because it's a new era, and it's true that we have to change, but that is hard. I mean, these are livelihoods. People have built their lives around a system that we put in place in a way that made sense, and then not just individual employees, but businesses, homeowners. I mean, I think that's a significant accomplishment that demonstrates real good faith. I mean, what are your views on that?
I agree with you. I agree with you, Congressman. It's a remarkable achievement. It's something that has been done in a compassionate way. Most of it has been done done by attrition. Some have been reassigned, but it's a remarkable achievement. The unfortunate thing is that the volume of mail has contracted faster when you consider the productivity increases than we've been able to keep up with.
Right, and that's the new world that we're in. So further adjustments have to be made. But my sense here is that no one's easing off on the gas pedal and trying to make these changes. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yes, sir, I would, and I think Postmaster General Donahoe has done a great job. He was in charge of this as Deputy Postmaster General, and I'm sure that Governor Giuliano or Chairman Giuliano would agree with that. Might have something to add.
Well, thanks. No, that's all right. Let me go on to another one. You know, one of the issues here is, do we go to a 5-day delivery to save money? And I understand there's some debate about how much, quote, money that we would save. But let me ask this question. I'll ask you, Mr. Donohue. What would be the impact on losing market share to your competitors if we went to a 5-day week?
FedEx and UPS don't deliver on Saturday now. So we don't think that there would be much of a change. We think that, again, customers have the opportunity, if they'd like with the Postal Service, to have a post office box to get their mail in, and we still would be offering express mail service. So Saturday's our lightest day. It's the day that from an advertising mail standpoint, that's the lightest day of the week where advertisers try to hit a mailbox, because generally people are out and about on Saturday. Monday through Friday they come home, they look at their mail, and then they do their shopping on the weekend.
Mr. Guffey, how about you? What's your sense on that? I know that on Saturday I have more time on my hands. And I mean, the Saturday delivery is something
I hate to see
I
hate to see any service cut to the American people unless it's absolutely necessary. There are other means of it would create a situation where private companies, mailbox, et cetera, and these places that provide their own boxes would not receive the mail, which is good for us because then the people who have those would have to come get post-off boxes if they wanted them on Saturday. But I hate to see any services cut to the American people when there's opportunities to keep providing those services.
Okay. And Chairman Giuliano, you've been talking, as we all have, about the first overpayment of contribution, right?
Correct.
I mean, this is an amazing situation. You can be over-aggressive or too passive, and it seems like we're making you front money beyond what actuarially, by any standard, should be required. Is that more or less the case?
That's my understanding. And Congressman, there's a pattern behind this. This is not new. In 2003, it was determined that CSRS was overfunded by, I can't remember what the number was, but over $50 billion.
So what's the problem of changing that?
We're told by OMB and Treasury that it takes a change in the law.
And that's it?
Well,
so, Mr. Chairman, we can help solve this problem. We change that law. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman, and I trust that in the President's budget, somewhere hidden, I didn't see it, he had considered that, but like I say, I missed that. We'll now see the gentlelady from New York for 5 minutes. Ms. Miller.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to ask the Postmaster General, Mr. Donohue, questions on the wage rates in comparison to competitors. And I know that some of your private sector competitors are non-union, but it is also my understanding that the wage rates of the Postal Service are roughly equivalent to the private sector competitors. And as the Postal Magazine study showed, that Postal Service letter carriers start at $15.85 an hour, while the starting pay for a UPS driver and a FedEx carrier are roughly $16 and $14 respectively. And I'd like to ask you, does the fact that the USPS is required by statute to deliver universal service and to do a 6-day-a-week drive-up, that their compensation costs put them possibly at a competitive disadvantage, but actually compared to the Postal Magazine, you're very competitive. In fact, you're lower than one of your major competitors. So I'd like your comments on that, Mr. Donohue.
Yes, thank you, Congresswoman Maloney. We do realize that we have a competitive rate of pay, and that's something very important to us. As we've sat down and negotiated with the APWU, the key thing for us was to achieve some short-term financial benefit from the contract, as well as increased flexibility and some workforce structure going forward, and we were able to do those. Labor costs do drive costs in this organization because we are such a labor-intensive organization. I think that we've worked very well with this union to come up with some good solutions going forward to reduce costs and help keep the Postal Service viable for the American public.
Thank you. And as the majority has pointed out repeatedly, 80% of the Postal Service's operating costs are related to workforce compensation. But just so that we are clear on this point, I am informed that less than two-thirds of that 80% is for compensation of the Postal Service's unionized workforce. Is that correct?
That's true.
So the unionized workforce of the Postal Service accounts for roughly 50% of the operating costs, not 80%, as some would imply. Is that correct?
As in any business, you're going to have wages. We've got wages that generally, wages and benefits make up about 70% of our costs. We have another 10% of our costs, roughly 9.1%. We pre-fund retiree health benefits. The other 20% cover transportation, supply services, fuel, like any other company.
Well, I think that it's important that we are clear about the actual labor costs represented by the unionized workforce, and you have helped us do that. And I'd like to open it up to the other members of the panel to comment on this issue, if you would, please.
Clearly, our bargaining unit only represents about 30% of the cost. I think about 29% of the cost.
Other comments?
Congressman Maloney, I would just comment that we think that the percentage of cost is not the issue. It's how the total cost relates to our financial position. We think that today's tentative agreement that we're talking about makes good steps to reducing those labor costs in a fair way while maintaining flexibility in using that workforce.
And Governor Miller?
Congresswoman, I think, number one, we have to look at every opportunity for the Postal Service to reduce costs, given our dire financial straits. Secondly, I would think that it would be, frankly, whether we were in dire financial straits or not, it would be irresponsible for us not to look at cost at every opportunity for a contract negotiation.
Well, my time has expired. Thank you very much.
I thank the gentlelady, and we'll now go into a second round. Double check to make sure that no one else came in. Okay, I want to tidy up a few things. The gentlelady from New York talked about unionized workforce. Mr. Donahoe, it doesn't matter whether your labor is unionized or not, does it? If it's 80%, it's 80%, right?
It represents 70% of our total cost, yes, sir. The other 10% is in the retiree health benefit cost.
Right. Well, but she actually said unionized workforce, which confused me a little because you have plenty of non-union workers because they're management and they are represented by associations.
Yes, sir.
Secondly, I think there was a lot of dialogue back and forth, and I want to set one thing clear from the center of the dais. This is not about the hardworking men and women of the Post Office. This hearing is not even about the union negotiations per se. Our committee's primary jurisdiction and the area of concern is the Post Office right-sized for the future? And one of our concerns, one of my concerns, goes to this, and Governor Miller, maybe you can help me with this. In the union negotiation, they negotiated a no layoff. Now, the problem is if we go from 6 days to 5 days and you score a savings of 60,000 workers and you can't lay off workers, how do you get the savings?
Well, Mr. Chairman, first, the no layoff provision was an extension of the previous contract.
No, I understand, but just narrowly, you can't score a savings if you can't get rid of the people, especially when you already have 100,000 too many today. I've asked my staff to look at a lot of areas that we may legislate, which would include, and for the Postmaster General, I know you're looking for legislation. I've got to tell you, what we probably need to do is bite the bullet one time and figure out how we're going to retire people that are over 55 and have over 20 years of service to help get your number down. Voluntary departures aren't working. The fact is you have less than 1%, or slightly more than 1%. You have the lowest attrition. Any private company would love to have the attrition you have. Basically, I mean, you still have 2 people that are 98 years old on the payroll. I mean, people don't retire, do they, Mr. Donahoe?
They do retire, Mr. Chairman. We have reduced the headcount in this organization by about 215,000 since the year.
But today you're carrying over 100,000, almost 200,000 more people than you would need if you started the organization. No, wait a second. Hear me out. If you started the organization to do the job that you currently need to do, you built the facilities you needed, and you hired the workforce you needed, you would need between 170 and 200,000 less people. You're shaking your head no. Governor Miller, if you built from the ground up, you'd need a lot less people, wouldn't you?
Right. You're right, Mr. Chairman, and you're right on the basic principle. But I will defend, as I understand it, Pat can correct me if I'm wrong, but the $3.8 billion estimate includes the problems of diminishing the numbers. So under this contract, because business is contracting, you don't realize all the flexibility benefits right away. But your point is correct if you think about it, and that is if you're going to be contracting very fast, how do you bring down the number of employees as rapidly as you
Okay.
need.
Well, I've got two more things in short time remaining. Mr. Guffey, you said you have a $1,600 retirement. Now, that's your retirement basically from your military service, right?
No.
That is your Postal Service
That's my
retirement?
Postal Service retirement.
Okay. Do you have any other entitlement coming now or in the future from your service to the Post Office?
No.
So that's it. Okay. We want to make sure we understood that. I've got a chart I want to put up very briefly, because this is the crux of one of our challenges. All of you have been talking about pre-funding and overfunding. When you look at that chart through 2016, which is the end of the pre-funding period, it is higher and then it drops down. You all see that. I want us to understand that every year you don't pre-fund between now and 2017, you have to add it back on in the later years. So one of the challenges I'm looking at is if we were to abate today all your pre-funding from now till 2017, although you would drop down, in 2017 we'd be looking for $9 or $10 billion and every year going up. So one of the challenges is even if we were to smooth it out, unless we were to forgive essentially what you're going to have to pay, essentially you're lowering it now, you're going to be raising it then. Does anyone disagree with that?
Yes, because that chart includes a track that would result in substantial overfunding of the account.
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask one exit question here. Chairman, you talked in terms of private corporations, and you've been very good on it, so I want to hold you to it. Are you willing to do what they did in 1992, have Congress statutorily tell you that if we're not going to stand behind the pensions, whatever you pay in, you pay in? Because if what you're asking to do is to not pre-fund and you want to sort of be there where 1992 made it, those private corporations, and I believe including United Airlines, who stuck the American people in their bankruptcy, and others, basically they limited their contribution, and a default meant that the retirees got less. If you don't, as you call it, pre-fund, and then the Post Office continues to drop off to where it's not able to pay in the amount because it simply would be too big a burden to have postal carrying make sense, wouldn't we ultimately end up with a Federal responsibility? In other words, today you're saying you don't want to, you call it pre-fund, we call it fully fund on our side of the aisle. If you don't pay in now, and we were to say, you know what, we'll give you the abatement, but we'll tie it to the default being a default that doesn't pay out, how would the letter carriers and others feel if what we said was, you know, because you don't want to pay it in, we'll do that, but then we won't stand behind it with full faith of the American people? How would they feel there?
I don't know how they feel, but let me.
Oh, you know how they'd feel, don't you, Chairman?
No, yes, I know.
You'll hear, if you'll hear, unless you say, I know they wouldn't like that.
I know they would not like that, but there's some confusion here, Mr. Chairman. I would like to straighten out, in all honesty. You're referring to funding pensions, fully funding pensions.
Well, but we were talking health care, but you used the analysis of the pensions earlier on and health care.
No, the 1992 date, and it might not be the exact year, but close to that.
It's when General Motors had this huge hit one time and locked it.
That was, yes, right. It was a book hit. It was a balance sheet hit. It was not a cash hit. They chose to determine what the liability levels were going to be for retiree health care benefits, not pensions. Pensions are governed by a whole different set of pension accounting rules, which for most public companies only require 80% funding based upon the actuarial needs.
And that's where I came up with what happened in the case of United Airlines and others. The fundamental question, my time has long expired, but the fundamental question I think that we're going to leave unanswered, but anyone can respond for the record, is, isn't it true that if we don't fully fund by some way, I'm not overfund, but fully fund, that we leave the taxpayers of America on the hook should the Post Office not be able to pay in the future?
We are paying, we are fully funding. The Postal Service is fully funded for pensions and overfunded for pensions, both FERS and CSRS, and overfunded for retiree health care benefits. All we're saying is, as I said in my statement, we're more than willing to continue paying of that $7.9 billion in 2011, that's 5.5 plus 2 plus some other $1 billion that we are paying to make sure that we're fully funding the retiree health care benefits on the actuarial needs. What we're concerned about and what we're asking for fairness and a level playing field is the $5.5 billion that came across in the 2006 PAEA that on an accelerated basis required us to pre-fund. That's what nobody else has to do. We want to stand behind these responsibilities. We have been. We think we can.
And I appreciate that. I apologize, but I really have exceeded my time. Mr. Cummings?
Let me ask you this, Mr. Donahoe. You are not asking to eliminate pre-funding, but to pay your retiree health benefits over on a true cost basis and spread it over 30 to 40 years versus tackling the liability in 10 years. Is that accurate?
What we're looking to do is get a true accounting of exactly what we owe. We would not shirk our responsibility. When we talk about 400,000 employees, that would include a postal service that delivers mail 5 days a week, that has a substantial number of non-career employees that would be not adding on to that liability, and then we could recalculate everything that we've got going forward. That's what we need to do, because until we do that, you don't really have an idea of exactly what's owed.
Let me say this to you, Mr. Donahoe. I, too, join my colleagues in applauding you for, and I say this very, very seriously, for hiring Ron Stroman. He did an outstanding job for us. We're sorry to see him leave. He helped us through our transition. He was absolutely magnificent. And that means a lot to us to know that he's there, and we really do appreciate that.
We agree with you. We're very happy to have him.
One of the things that I wanted, as both sides of the aisle have said that this is not an attack on postal employees, and that it's not. I don't want one single postal employee. I have some in my family, and I know how hard they work. Mr. Guffey, I understand, I really do understand your emotion. You don't have to apologize for that, because you're representing some people who have already given a lot. They've given a lot. I think anybody who looks at the fact that 100,000 people, 100,000 people, that's a lot of people, since 2008 are no longer working for the post office. That's 100,000 families. I sat, Mr. Guffey, on the Joint Economic Committee. And you know something very interesting that I've noticed is that when the employment rate is 8.8 for the nation, it's 15 point something for African Americans. And the Hispanic rate is close behind. And then, so when you tell me, Mr. Donahoe, that we've got 40% minorities, that's very, very significant. I want to see the unemployment rate come down also, just like all of us do. And when I hear about women, many of them, I'm sure, single head of households, struggling every day, trying to make it. Many of them have lost their jobs. When we talk about these loss of jobs, I don't want it to just be like collateral damage. And then we're talking about veterans. Until I got deeply involved I didn't know the post office hired this many veterans and took care of the disabled veterans and gave them some dignity, instead of having them, as I see them in the AMVET Center in my district, many times unable to find jobs and whatever. All of that is very important. And I cannot walk out of this room without telling you all that I'm proud of the negotiations that you've been involved in. And Governor Miller, I thank you for what you've said. I know you have some differing opinions here and there, but you said several things. You said we're a collegial body, but you said something else that is so significant. You said, I really believe that Mr. Donahoe is doing a great job. And that's what it's all about. And what I'm saying to you is that sometimes, one of the things I try to do with my kids is I try to be careful that I just don't say the negative when they do something wrong. I try to make sure I compliment them for doing something right. And sometimes I get a little bit upset that we don't root for the home team, for the team that is doing it right. And you said something to me, Mr. Donahoe, yesterday that I hope you don't mind me sharing. You said that if all the unions worked with you like Mr. Guffey's union worked with you, we could solve all kinds of problems. And so I just, again, Mr. Guffey, the reason why I'm talking about this is because I know that there are people, your employees who are sitting there saying, we're going to get 10%, new people saying, we're going to get 10% less. I know they're sitting there saying, we're not going to get a raise for 2 years. They're sitting there saying, a lot of our colleagues have already gone for whatever reasons. But I want them to know that a grateful Congress appreciates what they do every day. When I look at my mailman in the rain and snow, and although I was kidding a little bit, I'm serious, seeing dogs run after him, I don't know how many members of this Congress would walk up and down steps in the hot sun, delivering mail. And in many instances, going through all kinds of difficult circumstances. In my neighborhood, I live in the inner city of Baltimore, you may not even find a mailbox. They can't even find the mailbox to put the mail in. But some kind of way they do it over and over and over and over again. They get up and they do it. And I think that we need to take a time out and applaud them for what they do. And I know that public employees are catching hell from all levels and being constantly told that they're not doing this, not doing that. But the fact is that they're doing a lot of wonderful, great things. And again, I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this hearing, and may God bless you.
I thank the ranking member. I'd like to thank the witnesses for their testimony. In closing, I'd like to echo what the ranking member just said. This hearing has said in no uncertain terms, hardworking men and women of the Post Office, not just this particular union that we contract we talked about, but all of the workers. I think on both sides of the aisle, we've talked in terms of how do we get to a fair pay-in for the various future obligations of the Post Office, and in fact, how do we get to the right number of postal workers. I think we can all be proud on both sides of the aisle. This has not been about any kind of cheap shots on the Post Office, postal workers who have dramatically improved their productivity, whose rating by the American people continues to be high for customer satisfaction, but simply a matter of how do we get to the right number and the right recognition of obligations now and in the future to meet a mandate that this Congress has voted for and reiterated repeatedly when it came to the self-sufficiency of the Post Office. The ranking member and I take very seriously our unique obligation to oversee the Post Office and to, in fact, bring such laws as may be necessary to incorporate that. In closing, we did talk about one particular piece of legislation. I believe that both the Republicans and Democrats here are going to have to work on a number of pieces of legislation in order to help the Post Office control its own destiny, free up the Post Office to enter markets appropriately, and most importantly, to get to the right number. I can't from the dais, and I know the ranking member would share this with me, we can't tell you what the right number to pay in is. We can't tell you whether the Administration's refusal to look at FERS is appropriate or not. But this committee will hold hearings. We will reach out to the experts to try to find those right numbers. And if those numbers need to be adjusted, you have my assurance, and I believe you will have the assurance of every member on this committee, that we will work for those right numbers regardless of the scoring or other technical hurdles, because we do want the independence of the Post Office to be about your taking responsibility for your costs and us staying out of your way. So once again, I thank you. You've had many questions unanswered. I would invite you to use the next 7 days to revise and extend in any way you see fit, and they will, without objection, all be included in the record. We stand adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.